I believed my husband loved me for real. Even with all the age difference between us, me at 61, him at 42, I believed that man had chosen me for who I was, not for what I had. And look, you can judge me if you want. I deserve it. I was extremely naive. Because how does a woman my age, a woman who built a cosmetics empire from scratch, who was always sharp in business, fall into a trap like that? How did I not see it was all a lie? 19 years difference, y'all. 19 years. I found out, in the worst possible way, that it wasn't love. Never was. It was interest, money, convenience. He looked at me and saw a fat bank account, a paid-off house, a comfortable retirement, nothing more than that. And I got a question for you listening to me right now. Would you have believed it? If a younger man, handsome, charming, came into your life saying all the right words, treating you like you were the most special person in the world, would you doubt him? Or would you have let yourself go too, just like I did? Because I'm going to tell you something. Loneliness makes us believe a lot of lies. And I'd been alone for 9 years when I met Darnell. 9 years since my first husband passed away. 9 years sleeping in an empty bed, eating alone, with no one to talk to at the end of the day. So when this man showed up saying he wanted to share his life with me, I grabbed onto that illusion with everything I had. But his mask fell off on a rainy Sunday in April. Fell off in such a brutal, humiliating way that I still remember every detail of that day like it was yesterday. Here's what happened. On Tuesday of that week, I'd picked up my brand new Lincoln Navigator from the dealership. $95,000. A beautiful black car with those beige leather orthopedic seats that are a blessing for my back problems. Because look, I spent 41 years of my life working on my feet, carrying weight, breaking my back to build my business. And now that I was finally retired, that I could finally give myself this comfort, I bought that car. Paid cash. With my money. Money that I sweated to earn. Showed it to Darnell when I got home with the car. He looked at it, gave me that crooked little smile and said it was nice. That's it. No enthusiasm, no congratulations, honey. I thought it was strange but didn't make a big deal out of it. The next few days I used the car normally. Went to Publix to grocery shop, went to the salon to get my hair done, those kinds of things, everything normal. Until Sunday came around, the day of the monthly barbecue at my brother Thomas's house over in Buckhead. I woke up early, had my coffee, went to get dressed. When it was almost time to leave, I grabbed my purse and keys and headed to the garage. That's when my heart just dropped. The car wasn't there. I stood there for a good minute, just staring at the empty spot where my Navigator should have been, thinking maybe I was losing my mind. But no, the garage was completely empty. The Navigator was gone. I went back inside the house real quick and called Darnell's cell. He answered on the third ring, and I could hear street noise in the background like he was already out somewhere. I asked him straight up where my car was. And you know what he said? His voice came through all casual, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Oh yeah, babe, I lent it to my mom this morning. She needed it." Lent it to his mother, without asking me, without even telling me. Just took the keys to my car and gave it to his mother. I felt my chest get tight. I took a deep breath trying to stay calm and told him I needed the car right now, that I had the barbecue at Thomas's place. He had the nerve to say, "Just grab an Uber or something, Lorraine. It's not that serious. Just grab an Uber." Like it was nothing. I wanted to scream through that phone, but instead I just told him we were going to have a serious conversation about this when I got back. He said okay and hung up. And then, like the universe had decided to conspire against me that day, it started raining. A violent spring storm with lightning, thunder, strong winds. Water was coming down like the sky had cracked wide open. And there I was, without a car, having to call a lift to go to a family barbecue. When the driver pulled up, he looked a little surprised, looked at the gated community where I live, looked at me, and I saw that expression on his face like, why is someone who lives here calling a lift? But he didn't say anything, and neither did I. I was too embarrassed to explain. The rain was so heavy he couldn't get into Thomas's street. He stopped about 2 blocks away because the street was starting to flood. I had to get out of the car and walk in all that storm. My heeled shoes sank into the dirty street water. My dress stuck to my body. My hair, which I'd had done at the salon on Friday, got completely destroyed. And there I was, walking like a crazy person in the pouring rain, holding my purse tight against my chest, because inside I had some documents. Documents that, at that moment, I didn't yet know were going to change everything. When I finally got to Thomas's house, I came in through the kitchen door dripping water everywhere. The house was packed. The whole family had already arrived. Thomas at the grill making those ribs of his with his special barbecue sauce. My sister-in-law Monica setting up the salads on the big table in the covered outdoor area. My nephews playing dominoes and drinking beer. The kids running around the backyard. And right there, right in the middle of everybody, with an apron tied around his waist and a spatula in his hand like he was the king of the barbecue, was Darnell. That's right. He'd gotten there before me. And there he was, all smiles, serving food, chatting, laughing, like nothing had happened. When he saw me coming in soaking wet, he had the audacity to come up to me and say, "Hey baby, you're soaking wet. Why didn't you just wait for the rain to stop?" I looked at his face and didn't answer. Went straight to the back bathroom. Spent about 10 minutes in there trying to dry myself off with towels, trying to fix my hair that looked like a bird's nest, trying to breathe deep so I wouldn't explode in front of everybody. When I came out of the bathroom, I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. And that's when I heard it. Heard my brother Thomas asking Darnell something. His voice was coming from the outdoor area, but you could hear it crystal clear from the kitchen. Thomas was asking, "Hey Darnell, where's Lorraine's new navigator? I've been wanting to check it out. She said she got it this week." And then came the answer that made my blood run cold. Darnell answered, with that casual tone like he was talking about the weather. "Oh man, I gave that to my mom. She needed a decent car for her church activities and grocery shopping. Lorraine doesn't really need a luxury vehicle like that anyway. She's retired, barely leaves the house. It makes more sense for her to just use rideshare when she needs to go somewhere. No gas costs, no maintenance, no insurance headaches. It's actually way more economical." The whole outdoor area went dead quiet. I heard the conversation stop, heard the dominoes being set down on the table, heard even the kids' voices fade away. Everyone out there must have stopped doing whatever they were doing and just stared at Darnell, not believing what had just come out of his mouth. I walked out of the kitchen slowly, holding my glass of water so tight my fingers hurt. When I got to the outdoor area, everybody was looking at me. Thomas was frozen with the spatula in the air, his mouth half open in shock. Monica had her hand covering her mouth. My nephews had stopped their domino game and were staring at me with that expression of people who don't know what to do. And Darnell? Darnell was standing there smiling, like he'd just announced he'd won the lottery. I looked at him, right in his eyes, and I asked, with a voice that came out much calmer than I was feeling inside, "You gave my car to your mother?" He didn't even blink when he answered, "Yeah, babe, I was going to tell you, but you left so early this morning. Miss Evelyn really needed it. You know her old Buick finally died last month, and she's been struggling to get around. I figured since you're home most of the time anyway." He kept talking, but I wasn't listening anymore. Because in that moment, y'all, in that exact moment, I felt something inside me break. It wasn't my heart, no. My heart had broken a long time ago. I just hadn't realized it yet. What broke was the last little crumb of respect I still had for that man. Because look at this. He had taken a $95,000 car, a car that I had bought with my own money, and had given it as a gift to his mother, without asking me, without telling me, and still had the audacity to say, in front of my entire family, that I didn't need a nice car because I'm retired and barely leave the house, and more, that it was more economical for me to use Uber, like he paid for anything in my life, like he contributed a single penny to the bills. Him who never worked a day in his life, who's been living off me for 6 years, was standing there telling me what was economically viable for me. My brother Thomas was the first to react. He put the spatula down on the grill counter, looked at Darnell with an expression I'd never seen on his face, and started to speak. But I raised my hand, asking for quiet. I told Thomas, "It's okay, I'll handle this." And then I did something nobody expected. Something that took exactly 30 seconds of my time. But those 30 seconds, my people, those 30 seconds changed everything. I sat down in one of the chairs at the table. Real calm. Got my purse, opened it, took my cell phone out. And while everybody stood there watching me, not understanding what was happening, I opened a specific app. An app I'd installed on my phone on Tuesday, the same day I bought the car. Because look, you can call me paranoid. You can call me whatever you want. But after 6 years married to a man who never worked, who always had lame excuses for everything, who always treated me like I was an endless source of money, I'd learned to protect myself. That navigator wasn't just in my name. It was registered under the EIN of my old cosmetics company. A company that still legally exists, even though I'm retired, because I keep it active precisely for matters of assets and taxes. And when you have a vehicle registered as corporate property, and someone takes that vehicle without legal authorization, that has a very specific name in the law, misappropriation of corporate assets. So right there, in those 30 seconds, sitting in that chair with my entire family watching me, I accessed the insurance company app, reported the vehicle as having been removed without authorization, and activated the corporate asset recovery protocol. 30 seconds. That's all I needed. Put my phone back in my purse, picked up my glass of water, took a sip real slow. And then I looked at Darnell, who was standing there staring at me, not really understanding what I'd just done, and I gave him a little smile. A small smile, but one that said everything. I said, "All done." He frowned. All done with what? I didn't answer. Just got up, went to the food table, got myself a plate, put some ribs on it, potato salad, that mac and cheese Monica makes, that's delicious, and went back to the table to eat. Everybody kept staring at me without saying a word. I ate peacefully, chewing slowly, like nothing had happened, like my world hadn't just collapsed. 15 minutes went by. Darnell tried to go back to the grill, pretend everything was normal, but you could see he was uncomfortable. My nephews weren't playing dominoes anymore. Monica kept shooting me worried looks. Thomas was tense at the grill, flipping the meat harder than necessary. And then Darnell's phone rang. His ringtone is loud, one of those rap songs he loves. Everybody heard it. He looked at the phone screen, and I saw his face completely change. The blood seemed to drain right from his face. He answered quick and walked toward the back of the yard, talking low. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could tell by his gestures. He was agitated, ran his hand through his hair several times, paced back and forth. His voice kept getting louder, more nervous. After about 2 minutes, he came back. And look, y'all, his face wasn't arrogant anymore. It was panic. He came straight to me and asked, his voice shaking, "Lorraine, what did you do?" I tilted my head to the side, playing innocent. "What do you mean, honey?" His voice came out tight, almost a desperate whisper. "My mom just called. She's at the Lenox Square Mall. She said security approached her in the parking lot. They said something about the car being flagged in the system. She's freaking out, Lorraine. What's going on?" I put my fork down on my plate, wiped my mouth with the napkin, stood up real slow, looked right in his eyes, and said with the calmest voice in the world, "Oh, that. Yeah, I took care of that about 15 minutes ago." He was confused, desperate. Took care of what? What are you talking about? I crossed my arms. Darnell, that Lincoln Navigator was purchased with my money under my business EIN. You never had authorization to take that vehicle, let alone give it as a gift to your mother. He started stuttering, trying to explain himself, but I raised my hand, cutting him off. What you did has a legal name, Darnell. It's called misappropriation of corporate assets. And what I did? Well, I simply protected my property. Took me exactly 30 seconds. The outdoor area went completely silent. Not a single person moved. Even the kids had stopped playing and were watching us. My brother Thomas put down his spatula and came over to stand next to me. My nephew David, who's a lawyer, also got up and came to stand on my other side. Both of them right there, literally flanking me. Darnell's phone rang again. It was his mother, Evelyn, calling back. He answered, and this time you could hear her voice through the phone, screaming, hysterical, though I couldn't make out the words. Darnell's face got tighter and tighter with anger. From nervous, it went to desperate. From desperate, it went to angry. When he hung up, he turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't the charm anymore. It wasn't the pretty smile. It was his true face. The face of a man who just realized he'd messed with the wrong woman. He said, his voice coming out rough, "Lorraine, you can't do this. That's my mother out there." I didn't move. "And that's my car, or rather, it was my car, before you stole it. I didn't steal it. You took a $95,000 vehicle that belonged to me and gave it away without asking, without my permission, without my knowledge. What would you call that?" He tried to change tactics, softened his voice, put on that puppy dog expression he always used when he wanted something. "Baby, come on, we can talk about this. I just wanted to do something nice for my mom. You know she's been struggling financially." I cut him off mid-sentence. "With my money, Darnell? You wanted to do something nice with my money? Why didn't you use your own money? Oh, wait, you don't have any money, do you? Because you don't work." The outdoor area went so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Monica had her hand over her mouth. Thomas was shaking his head slowly. My nephews were looking at Darnell like they were seeing him for the first time. And me? I was just getting started. But before I continue, before I tell you everything that happened next, you need to understand something. That car, that whole situation, that was just the tip of the iceberg. Because what I discovered in the weeks and months that followed made those $95,000 look like pocket change. Let me take you back a bit. Let me show you who Darnell really was and what he'd really been doing all those 6 years. I met Darnell at a charity gala, one of those fancy events where rich folks get together, pay $500 a plate, and pretend they care about whatever cause is being promoted that night. This one was for a children's hospital. I remember that much. I'd bought a ticket because, well, I'd made good money with my cosmetics business, and I liked giving back to the community. I wasn't looking for a man that night, wasn't looking for romance. I'd been a widow for 9 years, and I'd made my peace with that. I had my house, my money, my routines. I was content. But then this man came up to me at the bar, tall, handsome, with this smile that could light up a room. He introduced himself as Darnell, said he'd noticed me from across the room and just had to come talk to me. Now, I'm not stupid. I knew what I looked like. I was 55 years old, a little overweight, hair going gray. And this man was clearly in his 30s, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine. So my first thought was, what does he want? But he was so charming, y'all, so attentive. He asked about my business, actually listened when I talked, asked intelligent questions. He told me he admired successful women, that his own mother had raised him alone and taught him to respect hard work. He said age was just a number, that what mattered was connection. And Lord help me, I believed him. We started dating. He'd take me to nice restaurants, always restaurants I paid for, I realize now, but at the time, I just thought he was going through a rough patch. He said he was between jobs, that he was looking for the right opportunity, that he didn't want to settle for just anything. 6 months later, we got married. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. My brother Thomas pulled me aside before the wedding and asked if I was sure about this. He said something felt off about Darnell, that he couldn't put his finger on it, but something wasn't right. I told Thomas to mind his business, told him I was a grown woman who could make my own decisions, told him he was just being overprotective. I should have listened to him. The first few months of marriage were good, or at least I thought they were good. Darnell was attentive, affectionate, always saying the right things. But then little things started happening. Little red flags that I ignored. He never got that job he was looking for. Always had excuses. The interview went well, But they hired someone internal. The position got canceled. The company went in a different direction. There was always something. Meanwhile, bills started appearing in my mailbox. A credit card I didn't remember opening, charges I didn't recognize. When I'd ask Darnell about it, he'd say he needed some things, that he'd pay me back, that he was embarrassed to keep asking for money, so he just used the card. I'd get upset, we'd argue, he'd cry and apologize and promise to do better. And I'd forgive him. Every single time, I'd forgive him. After about a year of marriage, I sat him down for a serious talk. Told him he needed to get a job, any job, just something to contribute. You know what he said? He looked at me with those big eyes and said, "Baby, I'm trying, but it's hard out here for a black man my age with gaps in his resume. The system is rigged against us." And he wasn't wrong about that. The system is rigged. But I later found out that Darnell wasn't even trying, wasn't sending out resumes, wasn't going to interviews, wasn't doing anything except living off me. But I didn't know that then. So I backed off, felt guilty for pushing him, told him to take his time and find the right fit. Meanwhile, my money kept disappearing. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. He needed new clothes for interviews that never happened. His mother needed help with her electric bill. His car needed repairs. Always something. And his mother. Oh Lord, his mother. Miss Evelyn. I met her about 2 months after Darnell and I started dating. She lived in a small house on the south side of Atlanta, one of those older neighborhoods that used to be nice but had gone downhill over the years. The house was clean but shabby, furniture from the 70s, carpet worn thin. Evelyn was 66 years old when I met her, though she looked older. She had this way of looking at me like she was sizing me up, calculating my worth. And from the very first conversation, she made it clear what she thought of me. She asked how old I was. When I told her I was 55, she raised her eyebrows and said, "Oh, well, Darnell always did like mature women." Mature, like I was some old lady he was doing charity work for. But she was sweet as pie to my face after that, always calling me baby and sweetheart and asking how I was doing. But there was something in her eyes, something calculating, that made me uncomfortable. And Darnell was always doing things for her. Which, look, I respect a man who takes care of his mother. That's admirable. But the things he was doing them with my money. He'd take her grocery shopping and come back with a $400 receipt. He'd pay her light bill, $250. He'd buy her new furniture, $1,800 for a couch. He'd take her to the spa, $300 for a massage and facial. Every time I'd question it, he'd get defensive. Say I didn't understand how hard she had it, that she'd sacrificed everything to raise him, that he owed her. And I'd feel guilty for even bringing it up. But sitting there at that barbecue, watching Darnell's face go from smug to panicked, I realized something. Evelyn hadn't sacrificed anything. She'd just found a good mark in her son, and now he'd found an even better mark in me. Darnell's phone rang for the 3rd time. He looked at the screen, looked at me, and I could see him trying to decide what to do. Finally, he answered, and this time he didn't walk away. This time he stood right there in front of everybody and took the call. His mother's voice was so loud coming through that phone that half the people at the barbecue could hear her. She was screaming about being humiliated, about security escorting her out of the mall parking lot, about the car being towed right there in front of everybody. Darnell tried to calm her down, kept saying he'd handle it, that he'd figure it out. But she wasn't having it. She wanted answers right now. He finally pulled the phone away from his ear and looked at me, really looked at me. And I saw in his eyes the exact moment he realized I wasn't the same woman who'd been letting him walk all over me for 6 years. When he hung up, he came over to where I was sitting. His voice came out low, almost pleading. "Lorraine, please, can we talk about this privately? Not here in front of everybody?" I took another bite of my ribs, chewed slowly, swallowed. Then I looked up at him and said, real calm, "No, Darnell. We're going to talk about it right here, because you didn't have a problem announcing to my entire family that I don't need a car, so I don't have a problem discussing this in front of them either." Thomas came over and stood next to my chair. He told Darnell that maybe he should explain himself. Explain how he thought it was okay to take someone else's property and give it away. Darnell's face tightened. He started getting agitated, saying it wasn't like that I was making it sound worse than it was, that he was just trying to help his mother, that he didn't think it would be such a big deal. My nephew David, who'd been quiet this whole time, spoke up. His voice was calm, professional, lawyer mode activated. He said, "Actually, Darnell, legally speaking, what you did is a pretty big deal. That vehicle was registered under Aunt Lorraine's business. You took it without authorization from the owner. That's theft. Or at the very least, it's unauthorized use of corporate property." Darnell turned on David, jabbing his finger in the air. "Man, stay out of this. This is between me and my wife." David didn't even flinch. He just looked at Darnell with this cold expression and said, "Your wife is my aunt, and I'm her attorney. So actually, this is very much my business." That's when I realized something. David wasn't just making conversation. He'd already been helping me, had been helping me for weeks. See, about a month before that barbecue, I'd gone to David's office. Told him I was having concerns about my marriage, about my finances, about the way Darnell was spending my money. Asked him what my options were. David had pulled all my credit reports, all my bank statements, all the records of every card I'd given Darnell access to. And what he found made both of us sick. In 6 years of marriage, Darnell had spent $168,000 of my money. $168,000. I remember sitting in David's office when he told me that number. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I actually thought I was going to throw up. David had broken it all down for me. Showed me spreadsheets, highlighted transactions, categorized everything. $44,000 had been spent directly on or given to Evelyn. Spa treatments, furniture, clothes, trips, direct cash transfers. The rest was Darnell's personal spending. Expensive clothes, electronics, restaurants, bars, jewelry. $168,000 in 6 years. That's $28,000 a year, over $2,000 a month. Money I'd worked 41 years to earn, just pouring down the drain. But you know what the worst part was? When David showed me the credit card statements, I realized Darnell had gotten additional cards issued that I didn't even know about. Cards in my name, under my accounts, that he'd been using freely. That's when I started preparing, started gathering evidence, documenting everything, getting ready for what I knew was coming. Because I'd made up my mind right there in David's office that I wasn't doing this anymore. Wasn't being used anymore. Wasn't being disrespected anymore. So when that navigator went missing from my garage on Sunday morning, I already knew what I was going to do. I'd set it up perfectly. Registered the car under my business on purpose, installed the tracking app on purpose, waited for him to make his move. And he did. He took the bait like a fish going after a worm. Now, sitting at that barbecue table with my family surrounding me and Darnell standing there looking defeated, I reached into my purse again, pulled out a folder, a manila folder full of papers. I set it on the table in front of me and opened it slowly. The first page was a credit card statement. I turned it around so Darnell could see it. I told him to take a look at that, told him to read the highlighted charges. His eyes scanned the page, and I saw his face lost its color, because right there, highlighted in yellow, were charges he'd made just last month. $4,850 in charges. Restaurant bills, clothing stores, a $720 watch he'd bought himself and never mentioned to me. I pulled out the next statement. Another card, another $3,200 in charges. More restaurants, more shopping, more nonsense. I kept pulling out statements, one after another, each one worse than the last. And with each page, Darnell's face got more and more ashen. Monica had come over to look too. She was reading over my shoulder, and I heard her gasp when she saw the numbers. She looked at Darnell with this expression of pure disgust. Thomas picked up one of the statements and read it carefully. When he got to the part where it showed $3,600 spent at a med spa, all for Evelyn's treatments, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping in his cheek. I let them all look, let them all see exactly what had been going on. Because I was done hiding it, done being embarrassed about it, done protecting Darnell's image. Finally, I gathered up all the papers and put them back in the folder, looked at Darnell and said, $168,000, Darnell, in 6 years. That's what you've spent of my money. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. He just stood there opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water. I continued, 44,000 of that went to your mother. The rest went to you. Clothes, jewelry, restaurants, bars, electronics, God knows what else. And now you have the nerve to stand here and tell my family that I don't need a nice car? Thomas stepped forward. His voice came out hard when he told Darnell he had 5 seconds to get out of his house, that he didn't want to see his face anymore. But I put my hand on Thomas's arm, told him to wait. I wasn't done yet. I looked at Darnell and told him he wasn't going back to my house, that he needed to pack his things and find somewhere else to stay, that I was done. His eyes went wide. Lorraine, you can't be serious. You're kicking me out? I stood up then, looked him straight in the eye and said, my voice steady and cold, Darnell, I should have kicked you out years ago, but I'm doing it now. You're not welcome in my home anymore. He started backpedaling, saying we could work it out, that we could go to counseling, that he'd change. All the same promises he'd made 100 times before. But I was done listening to promises. I told him I'd already called my lawyer, that divorce papers were being drawn up, that he had until Wednesday to get his belongings out of my house, or I'd have them put on the curb. The look on his face was priceless. Pure shock, mixed with panic, mixed with anger. He pointed his finger at me, his voice getting loud. You're gonna regret this, Lorraine. You're gonna end up alone, a bitter old woman, and you're gonna wish you had me back. I smiled. Not a happy smile, but a smile of someone who'd just been freed from prison. I told him I'd rather be alone than be with someone who saw me as nothing but a wallet. That I'd learned that lesson today. Thomas and David walked Darnell to the front gate. He left cursing, yelling back at me about how I was making the biggest mistake of my life. When they came back inside, the whole family surrounded me. Monica hugged me tight, telling me I'd done the right thing. My nephews patted my shoulder, saying they were proud of me. Thomas just pulled me into his arms and held me while I let out one tear. Just one. Because I wasn't going to waste any more tears on that man. But as the afternoon went on and the adrenaline started to wear off, reality set in. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because Darnell wasn't the type to just walk away quietly. And his mother? Well, she definitely wasn't going to let this go. And I was right. Because what happened in the days and weeks that followed? It made that barbecue confrontation look like child's play. But what I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have possibly known, was that the car and the money were just scratching the surface. There was something else. Something Darnell had been hiding from me for years. Something that when I found out about it would make me realize I'd never really known this man at all. And that discovery? It was coming sooner than I thought. That Sunday night, after the barbecue, I went home to an empty house. And you know what? For the first time in 6 years, that emptiness felt good. Felt like relief. I walked through each room, turning on all the lights, checking every corner. Part of me was afraid Darnell might have come back while I was at Thomas's place, might have done something stupid. But everything was untouched. Everything was quiet. I locked all the doors, checked all the windows, set the alarm system. Then I poured myself a glass of wine, a nice Merlot I'd been saving for a special occasion, and sat on my living room couch. And right there, all alone, I toasted to myself, to freedom, to finally having the courage to stand up for myself. But I didn't sleep well that night, kept waking up at every little sound, thinking I heard someone trying to get in. My mind was racing, going over everything that had happened, everything I needed to do. Monday morning, I woke up early, had my coffee while watching the sunrise through my kitchen window. And then I got to work. The first call I made was to my lawyer, Mr. Thompson. He's a man in his late 60s who's been handling my legal matters for over 20 years. If there's anyone I trust completely, It's him. I told him everything. The car, the confrontation at the barbecue, the spending, all of it. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he asked me the most important question. Did I want to stay married to this man? I didn't even have to think about it. I told him no. Absolutely not. I wanted a divorce, and I wanted it done as quickly and cleanly as possible. Mr. Thompson explained that we'd need to document everything. Every charge, every transaction, every lie. He said that since we had a prenuptial agreement specifying separate property, Darnell wouldn't be entitled to anything I'd owned before the marriage or acquired during it. But Darnell might try to fight anyway, might claim he deserved alimony or compensation for taking care of the home. I almost laughed at that. Darnell taking care of the home? The man had never washed a dish in his life, never cooked a meal, never did laundry. I did everything, or the housekeeper I paid for did it. Mr. Thompson told me to start gathering evidence. Bank statements, credit card bills, receipts, everything. And he said something else that made my blood run cold. He said I should prepare myself because divorces can get ugly, especially when money is involved. And Darnell struck him as the type who wouldn't go down without a fight. He was right about that. That afternoon, I was at home organizing documents when my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Darnell standing there on my porch, a backpack slung over his shoulder, looking pitiful. I didn't open the door, just spoke through it, asking what he wanted. His voice came out all soft and pleading. He said he needed to talk to me, that we needed to work this out, that he was sorry. I told him through the door that any communication from now on needed to go through my lawyer, that I'd given him until Wednesday to get his stuff, and it was only Monday, so he could come back then. He banged on the door, begging me to just give him 5 minutes, saying he'd made mistakes but he loved me, that we could fix this. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered that smug look on his face at the barbecue, the way he'd announced to my family that I didn't need a car, the $168,000 he'd stolen from me over 6 years. I told him to leave or I'd call the police, and I meant it. He stood there for a while longer, banging on the door, yelling through it. But eventually he gave up and left. I watched through my window as he walked down my driveway, got into a car I didn't recognize, probably an Uber, and drove off. Tuesday, I went to the bank. Met with my account manager, Stephen, a young guy in his 30s who'd always been helpful. I explained the situation to him, told him I needed to protect my accounts. Stephen was great about it. He helped me close all the joint accounts, all the credit cards that had Darnell's name on them or that he had access to. He helped me open new accounts with new numbers, set up fraud alerts, put flags on everything. And that's when Stephen told me something that made my stomach drop. He said there had been an attempt just that morning to transfer $11,200 from one of my business accounts. The system had flagged it as suspicious and blocked it, but someone had definitely tried. I asked Stephen if he could tell who had attempted it. He pulled up the information on his computer, and his face got real serious. He told me the transfer request had come from an IP address that traced back to a public library in South Atlanta. South Atlanta, where Evelyn lived. I asked Stephen to please keep that transaction blocked and to send me all the documentation. He printed everything out for me right there, and I took it straight to Mr. Thompson's office. Mr. Thompson looked at the papers and shook his head. He said this was bad. This showed that Darnell and his mother were actively trying to steal from me, even after being confronted. This wasn't just careless spending anymore. This was deliberate theft. He said we needed to move fast, file for divorce immediately, and get a restraining order. I agreed. Wednesday morning, the process server delivered the divorce papers to Darnell. I wasn't there, obviously, but the process server told Mr. Thompson that Darnell had been staying at his mother's house. He'd opened the door, taken one look at the papers, and his face had turned ashen. That same afternoon, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Evelyn. Her voice came through the phone all syrupy sweet at first. She said we needed to talk, woman to woman. That I was being too harsh on her son, that he was devastated, that I needed to give him another chance. I took a deep breath and told her, as politely as I could, that her son had spent 6 years using me, that he'd stolen from me, lied to me, disrespected me, and I wasn't giving him another chance. Her voice changed then, got sharp and nasty. She started accusing me of being a gold digger, of trapping her son, of trying to keep all my money to myself. I actually laughed out loud at that. I told her to let me get this straight. Her son, who had never worked a day in his life, who'd spent $168,000 of my money, was the victim here, and I was the gold digger? She went off then, started calling me names, saying I was a bitter old woman, that I was too old and ugly for her son anyway, that he'd only married me for money, and she was glad he'd gotten as much as he could. That last part actually didn't hurt me like she probably thought it would. It just confirmed what I already knew. They'd both been playing me from the start. I told her real calm that I appreciated her honesty, that at least now I knew for certain what kind of people they both were. And then I told her politely not to call me again, and to tell her son that any contact needed to go through my lawyer. I hung up before she could respond. My hand was shaking when I put the phone down, not from fear, but from anger. Anger that I'd wasted 6 years of my life on these people. Anger that I'd been so blind, so stupid, so desperate for companionship that I'd ignored every red flag. Thursday, I met with Mr. Thompson again. We filed for a restraining order against Darnell, citing harassment and attempted theft. The judge granted a temporary order, saying Darnell had to stay at least 750 feet away from me, my home, and my vehicles. When Darnell was served with the restraining order, according to Mr. Thompson's investigator, he completely lost it, started yelling at the process server, saying I couldn't do this to him, that I was ruining his life. The process server apparently told him that he'd ruined his own life, and Darnell needed to sign the papers or be held in contempt. He signed, but he was cussing the whole time. Friday was quiet, too quiet. I went about my day, went to Publix, got my nails done, came home and watched some TV, but I had this feeling in my gut that something was coming, that Darnell and Evelyn weren't just going to accept this and move on. I was right. Saturday morning, I woke up to find graffiti on my front gate. Someone had spray painted in big red letters, "Cold-hearted witch." I stood there in my driveway in my bathrobe, staring at those words, feeling my heart pound. Who had done this? Darnell? Evelyn? Some friend of theirs? I called the police, filed a report. They took pictures, said they'd patrol my neighborhood more frequently, but that without evidence of who did it, there wasn't much they could do. I called Thomas. He came over immediately with Monica and my nephew David. They helped me clean off the graffiti with paint remover, but you could still see the shadow of the words on the white gate. David, looking serious, told me I needed to install security cameras. Good ones, with night vision and cloud storage. He said if Darnell or Evelyn were going to escalate things, I needed evidence. That same day, I called a security company. They came out within 2 hours. They had an opening because of a cancellation, and installed 8 cameras around my property. Front gate, driveway, all 4 corners of the house, backyard. Everything got covered. The technician who installed them showed me how to access the footage from my phone, how to set up motion alerts, how to save clips to the cloud. He told me I'd made a smart choice, that in his experience, domestic situations like mine often got worse before they got better. His words stuck with me, got worse before they got better. That night I barely slept. Every little sound had me checking the cameras on my phone. A car driving by, a neighbor's cat walking across my lawn, the wind rustling the trees. I was on edge, waiting for something to happen. And at 3:15 in the morning, it did. My phone buzzed with a motion alert. I grabbed it, opened the camera app, and there on my front gate camera was a figure. A man trying to climb over my fence. My heart nearly stopped. I zoomed in on the image, and even in the dark, I could tell who it was. Darnell. He was trying to climb over my fence, struggling because the fence was 6 feet tall and he wasn't exactly athletic. I watched him for about 5 seconds, then I called the security company's emergency line. They told me to stay inside and lock all doors. They said they were sending a patrol car immediately and contacting the police. I watched on my phone as Darnell kept trying to get over that fence. He finally managed to get one leg over when I heard sirens in the distance. He heard them too, because he froze. Then he dropped back down to the street side and took off, running down the sidewalk. The security patrol car pulled up about 30 seconds later. They didn't catch Darnell, but the cameras had recorded everything. Clear footage of his face, of him attempting to break into my property. The police came about 10 minutes after that. I showed them the footage. They took a copy of it, said this was a clear violation of the restraining order. They said they'd pick Darnell up and he'd be spending the night in jail. Sure enough, around 5 that morning, they called to tell me they'd arrested him at his mother's house. He'd be arraigned on Monday for violating the restraining order and attempted trespassing. I should have felt relieved, should have felt safe, but all I felt was tired. So tired. Sunday I stayed home. Didn't go anywhere, didn't do anything. Just sat in my house with all the cameras running, waiting for the next shoe to drop. And Monday, it did. Mr. Thompson called me with news. Darnell had been arraigned that morning. He'd pleaded not guilty, claimed he was just trying to get some of his belongings that I was refusing to give him. The judge didn't buy it, especially with the video evidence. Darnell was released on bail, but the restraining order was extended and strengthened. But that wasn't the news Mr. Thompson had called about. He told me to sit down. His voice had that tone that meant what was coming was bad. Darnell's lawyer, and yes, he'd somehow scraped together money for a lawyer, had filed a motion in the divorce case. He was requesting alimony. I almost dropped the phone. I asked Mr. Thompson to repeat that because I couldn't have heard right. But I had heard right. Darnell was claiming that during our 6-year marriage, he had given up career opportunities to manage the household and support my retirement. That he was now financially dependent and needed monthly support until he could get back on his feet professionally. I started laughing, not a happy laugh, a kind of hysterical, disbelieving laugh. I told Mr. Thompson that Darnell had never had a career to give up, that he'd never managed anything, that he'd never supported me in any way. Mr. Thompson said he knew that, but Darnell was going to try to argue it anyway, and we'd have to go to court to prove he was lying. I asked how long this would take. Mr. Thompson said probably several months, that we'd have to gather evidence, take depositions, build our case, that I needed to be prepared for this to get dragged out. I felt my whole body sag. Several months of this? Several months of lawyers and courts and fighting? But then I thought about that envelope. That yellow envelope I'd found while organizing my documents. The one I'd put in my safety deposit box years ago. The one with the letter and the photos. I told Mr. Thompson I might have something that would help our case. Something Darnell didn't know I had. Something that would prove he'd been lying to me from the very beginning of our marriage. Mr. Thompson asked what it was. I told him I'd bring it to his office the next day. That he needed to see it in person. Because what I had in that envelope, it was going to blow this whole case wide open. It was going to show everyone exactly what kind of man Darnell really was. And when it came out, well, let's just say Darnell was going to wish he'd never asked for alimony. That yellow envelope. Lord, when I think about that yellow envelope, I still get chills. See, I'd found it a week before the barbecue, when I was going through my documents, preparing for what I knew was coming. It was stuck at the bottom of a box full of old papers from my business, tax returns from years ago, contracts I'd signed, receipts for equipment I'd bought. And there, underneath all of that, was this plain yellow envelope with my handwriting on it. Just one word: insurance. I'd written that envelope 4 years ago. 4 years ago, when I discovered something about Darnell that nearly destroyed me. Something I'd never told anyone about. Something I'd kept secret because I was ashamed, because I felt stupid, because I didn't know what else to do. But now I was ready to use it. Let me take you back to about 8 months after Darnell and I got married. Things were already strained between us. He still hadn't found a job, money was disappearing from my accounts, and I was starting to feel like something wasn't right. Then one day, I noticed Darnell had started disappearing for hours at a time. He'd leave the house around 10 in the morning, say he was going to look for work or help a friend or run errands for his mother. But he wouldn't come back until 4, 5 in the afternoon. And when he'd get home, he'd be secretive. Wouldn't really answer my questions about where he'd been. A woman's intuition is a powerful thing, y'all. And mine was screaming at me that something was wrong. So one Thursday afternoon, I did something I'm not proud of. I followed him. I waited until he left the house, gave him a few minutes head start, then got in my car and followed behind him. He drove across town to a neighborhood I'd never been to before. One of those older apartment complexes that had seen better days. Paint peeling off the buildings, cracked parking lot, rusty playground equipment. He parked, got out of the car carrying a bag from Target, and walked up to one of the apartment buildings. Pressed a buzzer, waited. After a minute, the door opened, and he went inside. I sat in my car for 2 hours, just waiting, watching, my heart pounding the whole time. And then he came out. But he didn't come out alone. There was a woman with him. Young, maybe late 20s, pretty, with her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she was holding a little baby that couldn't have been more than 6 months old. I watched as Darnell hugged this woman, watched as he kissed that baby's forehead, watched as he smiled at them in a way he never smiled at me. And then he got in his car and drove off. I sat there in shock for a good 10 minutes after he left. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel. My mind was racing. Who was that woman? Whose baby was that? Was Darnell cheating on me? When I finally got myself together enough to drive, I went home. Darnell was already there, sitting on the couch watching TV like nothing had happened. I asked him where he'd been. He said he'd been at his mother's house helping her with some repairs. I knew he was lying. I knew it in my bones. That night, I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Just kept seeing that image of Darnell with that woman and that baby. The next morning, I made a decision. I hired a private investigator, a young guy named Coleman who David had recommended for background checks and things like that. I told Mr. Coleman what I'd seen, gave him the address of the apartment complex, asked him to find out who that woman was and what Darnell's relationship was with her. 3 days later, Mr. Coleman called me with the results, and what he told me made my world crumble. The woman's name was Shanice. She was 29 years old and worked as a hairstylist at a beauty shop not far from where she lived. And that baby? That baby was Darnell's son. Darnell had a son, a 6-month-old baby boy named Jaden. Mr. Coleman explained that he'd done some digging. Darnell and Shanice had been together about 3 years before he met me. When Shanice got pregnant, Darnell disappeared, just vanished out of her life. Wouldn't answer her calls, wouldn't help with anything, left her to raise that baby completely alone. But then, about 2 months after Darnell and I got married, he'd showed back up in Shanice's life. Told her he wanted to be a father to Jaden, wanted to help out, started bringing money, bringing diapers and formula and baby clothes. The investigator had talked to some of Shanice's neighbors, got the whole story. And here's the thing that made me sick. The money Darnell was giving Shanice? My money. The diapers, the formula, the clothes, bought with my credit cards. He'd been using my money to support a child I didn't even know existed. When Mr. Coleman told me all this, I just sat there in his office crying. Not loud, dramatic crying. Just quiet tears running down my face while he pushed a box of tissues across his desk to me. I asked him how much money Darnell had given Shanice. He checked his notes and told me it looked like about $3,500 total over the past 6 months. $3,500 of my money, going to support a child Darnell had never told me about. I thanked Mr. Coleman for his work, paid his fee, and asked him to write up everything he'd found in a formal report. He said he'd have it to me by the end of the week. Then I did something that surprised even me. I went to see Shanice. I showed up at her apartment on a Tuesday afternoon, knocked on the door, heart racing. She opened it with little Jaden on her hip, and when she saw me, I watched all the color drain out of her face. She knew who I was. Somehow, she knew. She said my name like a question. "Lorraine?" I asked if we could talk. She hesitated, but let me in. The apartment was small, clean but worn, with mismatched furniture and baby toys scattered on the floor. She offered me a seat on her couch and sat across from me in a chair, still holding Jaden. I looked at that baby. Really looked at him. And there was no denying it. He had Darnell's eyes, Darnell's nose. He was beautiful. I told Shanice I knew everything. That I knew Jaden was Darnell's son. That I knew Darnell had been helping her financially. She started crying immediately. Tears just streaming down her face. She swore she didn't know Darnell was married. Said he'd told her he was single, that he'd gotten his life together, that he wanted to be a real father to Jaden. She said she'd been struggling so hard on her own, working long hours at the salon just to pay rent and keep food on the table, that when Darnell showed up offering help, she'd been grateful. I believed her. Looking at her face, seeing her tears, I knew she was telling the truth. She was just another one of Darnell's victims. I asked her if she knew where the money was coming from. If Darnell had told her he had a job. She wiped her eyes and said he told her he was working in sales, that he traveled a lot for work. She'd never questioned it because she'd just been so relieved to have help. I took a deep breath. This was the hard part. I told her the truth, that Darnell didn't work, that he'd never worked, that he lived off me, that every dollar he had was my money. The money he'd been giving her? All mine. Her hand flew to her mouth and she just stared at me in horror. She started apologizing over and over, saying she didn't know, that she would have never taken the money if she'd known, that she was so sorry. I held up my hand, stopping her. Told her she had nothing to apologize for, that she hadn't done anything wrong, that the only person who'd done wrong was Darnell. We sat there in silence for a minute. Jaden started fussing and Shanice stood up to rock him, and that's when I made her an offer. I told her I'd give her $1,850 right then, and another $1,850 in 4 months. But she had to do something for me. She had to file for paternity acknowledgement and child support against Darnell. She looked at me confused, asking why I'd want her to do that. I explained that Darnell had a son. That was a fact, and that son deserved support from his father. Not from me, not from my money, but from Darnell himself. And if Darnell didn't work, well then, he needed to get a job to pay that support. The only way to force him to take responsibility was through the courts. Shanice started crying again, but this time they were tears of relief. She asked if I was really going to help her like that. I told her it wasn't charity, it was strategy, and it was the right thing to do. That baby deserved to have his father contribute to his care. That same day, I went to the ATM and withdrew $1,850 in cash, brought it back to Shanice and put it in her hand. Then I took her to see a family law attorney I knew, a woman named Patricia Hayes who specialized in child support cases. Ms. Hayes listened to Shanice's story and immediately agreed to take the case. She said it was clear-cut. Darnell was the father. We could prove that with a paternity test if needed. And he had a legal obligation to support his child. Within 2 weeks, Darnell was served with papers, paternity acknowledgement and child support petition. I'll never forget the day he came home after being served. His face was white as a sheet. He came into the kitchen where I was making dinner and just stood there holding those papers. I asked him, real calm, if he wanted to tell me about it. He tried to play dumb at first, asking what I was talking about. So I turned around from the stove, wiped my hands on a towel and said, Darnell, I know about Shanice, and I know about Jaden. I know about everything. The way his face crumpled, y'all, it was like watching a building collapse. He tried to explain, stuttering out excuses, that he was going to tell me, that he didn't know how, that it had happened before we met. I told him I didn't care when it happened. What I cared about was that he'd lied to me, that he'd hidden a child from me, and that he'd been using my money to support that child without telling me. He started getting defensive then. raising his voice, saying he had to help his son, that what was he supposed to do, abandon his own child? I looked him dead in the eye and told him he should help his son with his own money, that he should get a job and pay child support like every other father out there, not use his wife's money behind her back. That was our first real big fight. We screamed at each other for over an hour. He said I was being cruel, that I didn't understand. I said he was being a liar and a thief. Eventually, we both just ran out of steam. He slept on the couch that night, and the next day, we didn't speak at all. In the days that followed, I did something else. I wrote a letter. A detailed letter explaining everything I'd discovered, the affair with Shanice, the hidden son, the money he'd spent on them without my knowledge. And I put that letter in an envelope along with photos Mr. Coleman had taken of Darnell with Shanice and Jaden. I sealed that envelope, wrote insurance on the front, and put it in my safety deposit box at the bank. Because even then, even as hurt and angry as I was, some part of me knew I might need proof of this someday. After that, things got quiet for a while. The child support case moved forward. Darnell was court-ordered to pay support, but since he had no job and no income, the payments were set at a minimal amount with the understanding they'd increase when he got employment. Darnell and I never talked about Shanice or Jaden again. We just pretended it hadn't happened. We went back to our regular routine, him living off me ignoring all the red flags. I know what you're thinking. Why did I stay? Why didn't I leave him then? The truth? I was embarrassed, ashamed. I'd been so proud when I married Darnell, thought I'd found a second chance at love. And admitting he'd been lying to me from the start? That he had a whole secret child I didn't know about? That felt like admitting I'd been a fool. So I stayed. For 4 more years, I stayed. But I kept that letter, kept those photos, kept them locked away safe. And now, sitting in Mr. Thompson's office 4 years later, I pulled that envelope out of my purse and laid it on his desk. He opened it carefully, read the letter, looked at the photos. When he finished, he looked up at me with something like admiration in his eyes. He told me this was exactly what we needed, that this proved Darnell had been dishonest from the beginning of our marriage, that he'd hidden crucial information, that he'd acted in bad faith, and most importantly, that he'd used my resources without my knowledge to support obligations he'd never disclosed. Mr. Thompson said that with this evidence, Darnell's request for alimony wouldn't stand a chance. No judge would order me to pay support to a man who'd lied to me, stolen from me, and hidden a whole child from me for years. I asked him what we should do with it. He said we'd file it with the court as evidence, make it part of the official record. I hesitated, asked if that meant it would become public, that people would know. He nodded, saying yes, divorce proceedings were public record. Anyone could access them. I thought about that for a minute. Thought about how embarrassing it would be, how people would talk, how they'd judge me for being stupid enough to stay with a man like that. But then I thought about Darnell standing in front of my family at that barbecue, smirking while he announced I didn't need a car. Thought about the $168,000 he'd stolen from me. Thought about all the lies, all the manipulation, all the years of disrespect. And I told Mr. Thompson to file it, all of it. I didn't care who knew anymore. I was done protecting Darnell's reputation, done protecting him from the consequences of his own actions. Mr. Thompson smiled and said he'd have it filed by the end of the day. When I left his office, I felt lighter, like I'd finally taken off a heavy coat I'd been wearing for years. But as I was driving home, my phone rang. It was Shanice. I hadn't talked to her in almost 4 years. Not since that day I'd helped her file the child support case, but I'd given her my number back then and told her to call if she ever needed anything. Her voice came through the phone shaky and scared. She told me that morning Evelyn had shown up at her apartment. My heart sank. I asked her what happened. Shanice explained that Evelyn had banged on her door at 7 in the morning. When Shanice opened it, thinking it might be an emergency, Evelyn had pushed her way inside and started screaming, calling her all kinds of names, saying she'd ruined Darnell's life, that she was a homewrecker, that she should be ashamed of herself for trapping a man with a baby. Shanice had tried to get her to leave, told her she was going to call the police. But Evelyn just kept screaming, woke up little Jaden, who started crying. It was a horrible scene. Finally, Shanice had managed to push Evelyn out of the apartment and lock the door. But Evelyn had stood outside screaming for another 10 minutes before finally leaving. I asked Shanice if she was okay, if Jaden was okay. She said they were fine, but she was scared. Scared Evelyn might come back, scared of what she might do. I told Shanice to go to the police station right now and file a report, to document everything. And I asked her to send me any video or audio recordings she had. She said she'd recorded the whole thing on her phone, that she'd send it to me right away. When the video came through, I watched it and felt sick. Evelyn was completely unhinged, screaming at this poor girl who'd done nothing wrong, terrifying a child. I forwarded the video to Mr. Thompson immediately, told him we needed to add Evelyn to the restraining order. He agreed, said he'd file an emergency motion that afternoon. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about me and Darnell anymore. This had become a war, and Evelyn was just as much my enemy as her son was. But what I didn't know yet was just how far they were willing to go. What I didn't know was that they weren't just desperate. They were dangerous, and the things they were about to try, well, they were going to make everything else look like nothing. The days following the video of Evelyn harassing Shanice were tense. Real tense. I felt like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, you know? And I wasn't wrong to feel that way. Mr. Thompson filed the emergency restraining order against Evelyn on a Thursday afternoon. By Friday morning, she'd been served. And according to the process server, she'd reacted exactly how I expected, with drama, tears, and threats. She'd apparently screamed at the process server that I was persecuting her, that I was a vindictive woman trying to destroy her family, that she was going to fight this. The process server, bless him, had calmly told her that if she violated the order, she'd be arrested. That shut her up real quick. But the order being in place didn't mean the harassment stopped. It just meant it got more creative. That weekend, I started noticing a car parked on my street. A silver Toyota Corolla, older model, kind of beat up. It would park about 4 houses down from mine and just sit there. I'd see it in the morning when I opened my curtains. I'd see it in the afternoon when I came back from errands. I'd see it at night before I went to bed. At first, I thought maybe it was a neighbor's visitor or something. But by Sunday, I knew better. That car was watching my house. I couldn't see who was inside because of the tinted windows, but I had a pretty good guess. I took pictures of the car with my phone, made note of the times I saw it, got a partial license plate number. Monday morning, I called Mr. Coleman, the private investigator who'd helped me before. Told him about the car, sent him the pictures and the partial plate. He called me back 2 hours later. The car was registered to a woman named Cheryl Morrison, Evelyn's best friend. So they were having Evelyn's friend do the stalking to get around the restraining order. Real smart. Except not smart enough because now we had evidence of harassment by proxy. I forwarded all the information to Mr. Thompson. He said we could file an additional complaint, possibly get the restraining order extended to include associates of Evelyn who were acting on her behalf. But before we could do that, things escalated. Tuesday afternoon, I went to the CVS to pick up a prescription. Did my shopping, got my medicine, came out to the parking lot, and all 4 of my tires were slashed. I stood there in that parking lot, just staring at my car. 4 brand new tires on my Mercedes, all of them cut deep, the car sitting low on the rims. The parking lot had cameras, so I went back inside and asked the manager if I could file a report and get the footage. He was real helpful, called the police for me, pulled up the security tapes while we waited. And there on the video, clear as day, was Cheryl Morrison walking past my car. You couldn't see her actually slash the tires because she'd positioned herself on the blind side of the camera, but you could see her walk up to the car, crouch down for a minute, then walk away. And about 30 seconds later, my car started sinking. The police officer who responded took copies of the video, ran Cheryl's name, and found out she had a prior record for vandalism and assault. He told me he'd put out a warrant for her arrest. I called my insurance company, Got a tow truck to take my car to the shop. While I was waiting for the tow, I called Monica and asked if she could come pick me up. Monica arrived about 20 minutes later, took one look at my slashed tires, and just shook her head. She asked how much more of this I was going to have to take. I told her honestly, I didn't know. But I wasn't backing down. I'd come too far to quit now. When I got home that evening, there was something on my doorstep. An envelope. Plain white, no return address, my name written in block letters. I didn't touch it at first, just stood there looking at it, wondering if I should call the police. But curiosity got the better of me. I put on gloves, I had some gardening gloves in my garage, and carefully opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with a message printed from a computer. Drop the divorce and the charges or you'll regret it. A threat. A direct, clear threat. I took pictures of the envelope and the note. Didn't touch anything else with my bare hands. Called the police again. A different officer came this time. A woman named Officer Martinez. She took the envelope and note as evidence. Told me this was serious, that I needed to be careful. I was already being careful. I wasn't going anywhere alone, was checking my cameras constantly, had all my doors and windows locked at all times. But Officer Martinez suggested I take it a step further. She recommended I vary my routines, not go to the same places at the same times, maybe even stay somewhere else for a few days. I thought about that. Thought about leaving my own home because I was being threatened. And the idea made me angry. This was my house. I'd worked 41 years to earn this house. And I was supposed to leave it because Darnell and his crazy mother couldn't accept consequences? No, I wasn't leaving. But I did start being more careful. I'd check my car before getting in it. I'd look over my shoulder when walking to my door. I'd keep my phone in my hand at all times with 911 ready to dial. Wednesday, I had my court hearing for the divorce. It was just a preliminary hearing, setting timelines and addressing the immediate motions. Darnell's lawyer had filed for temporary spousal support while the divorce was pending. Mr. Thompson had filed our counter-motion denying any obligation and presenting the evidence of Darnell's fraud. I walked into that courtroom with my head held high. Thomas and Monica came with me for moral support, sat right behind me in the gallery. Darnell was already there with his lawyer, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit that I'm sure Darnell couldn't afford. Probably got some cut-rate attorney willing to work on contingency, hoping to get a piece of my money. When Darnell saw me walk in, he wouldn't meet my eyes, just stared down at the table in front of him. The judge came in, a stern-looking woman in her mid-50s named Judge Patricia Reynolds. She reviewed the motions, asked both lawyers to present their arguments. Darnell's lawyer went first. Started talking about how Darnell had sacrificed his career prospects to support the household during our 6-year marriage, how he was now without means and needed temporary support. I actually had to stop myself from laughing out loud. Then it was Mr. Thompson's turn. And oh, he was brilliant. He presented the credit card statements showing the $168,000 in spending. Presented the evidence of the additional cards Darnell had gotten without my knowledge. Presented employment records, or rather, the complete lack of employment records, showing Darnell had never worked during our marriage or for years before it. And then he presented the letter. The letter I'd written 4 years ago about Shanice and Jaden. Darnell's lawyer tried to object, saying it wasn't relevant, but Judge Reynolds allowed it. She read the letter carefully, looked at the photos, then looked at Darnell with this expression of complete disgust. She asked Darnell directly if it was true. If he had a son he'd hidden from me during our marriage. Darnell mumbled something. Judge Reynolds told him to speak up. His voice came out barely above a whisper when he said, "Yes, Your Honor, I have a son." Judge Reynolds set down the papers and looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something that made me want to stand up and cheer. "Mr. Blake, you hid a child from your wife. You used her financial resources without her knowledge to support that child. You never held employment during the 6 years of your marriage. And now you have the audacity to come into my courtroom asking this woman to continue supporting you, Request for temporary spousal support is denied. Darnell's face went completely blank. His lawyer started sputtering about needing time to present additional evidence, but Judge Reynolds cut him off. She said temporary support was denied and the case would proceed to trial for final dissolution. She set a trial date for 3 months out and dismissed us. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt like I was floating. Thomas hugged me tight, told me he was proud of me. Monica was grinning from ear to ear. But Darnell? He was standing in the hallway looking destroyed. His lawyer was talking to him, probably trying to figure out their next move, but Darnell wasn't listening. He was just staring at the floor. As I walked past him toward the exit, he looked up. Our eyes met for just a second. And in that second, I saw it. Real, genuine fear. Because he just realized he wasn't going to win this. That I had evidence, I had the law on my side, and I wasn't going to back down. I didn't say anything to him. Just kept walking. When I got to my car in the parking lot, I'd gotten my tires replaced that morning. I sat there for a minute just breathing, letting it all sink in. I'd won the first battle. Not the war, but the first real battle. That night, I treated myself to a nice dinner. Went to a fancy steakhouse downtown, ordered a filet mignon and a glass of expensive wine. Enjoyed every single bite. But when I got home around 9 that night, my security cameras were going crazy. Motion alerts on my phone, one after another. I pulled up the app and felt my blood run cold. There was someone in my backyard, a man, walking around looking in my windows. I didn't go inside, just stayed in my car in the driveway with the doors locked and called 911. The police arrived in less than 5 minutes. I watched on my phone camera as they surrounded my house, ordered the person to come out. And when he did, hands up in surrender, I saw who it was. Malik. That was the name Darnell's lawyer had said during a sidebar I'd overheard. Malik something. I didn't know who he was, but the police apparently did, because they arrested him immediately, handcuffed him, read him his rights. Later, Officer Martinez called me to explain. Malik had a record. Multiple arrests for fraud, identity theft, forgery. He was known to police, and security footage showed he'd been with Darnell and Evelyn multiple times in the past few weeks. Officer Martinez told me this was serious, that if Malik was involved, there was probably something bigger going on. She asked if I'd had any suspicious activity with my identity, my accounts, anything like that. I thought about it and realized I hadn't checked in a while. I'd frozen my credit after Mr. Coleman's warning, but that was weeks ago. The next morning, I called my bank, asked them to run a full check on all my accounts, look for any suspicious activity. What they found made me sick to my stomach. There had been 3 attempts to open new credit cards in my name. All 3 had been blocked because of the freeze I'd put on my credit. There had been an attempt to take out a personal loan for $39,500, also blocked. And there had been multiple attempts to access my bank accounts using fake credentials. All of it had failed because I'd protected myself. But if I hadn't, they would have stolen everything. I immediately called Mr. Thompson and told him what I'd discovered. He said we needed to file a police report for identity theft and attempted fraud. That this was criminal, not just civil court stuff anymore. I went to the police station that afternoon and filed a formal report. Gave them all the information my bank had given me, all the security camera footage showing Darnell and Evelyn meeting with Malik. The detective assigned to my case, a middle-aged man named Detective Harris, told me this was a serious situation. He said they'd open a full investigation into Darnell, Evelyn, and Malik, that all 3 of them could be facing criminal charges. But then he said something that scared me. He told me I needed to be extra careful, that people who commit financial crimes like this, when they get desperate, sometimes they escalate to other kinds of crimes, violent crimes. He asked if I'd consider staying somewhere else for a while, somewhere Darnell and Evelyn didn't know about. I thought about Monica and Thomas's house, but I didn't want to put them in danger. Instead, I decided to stay put but beef up my security even more. I hired a private security company to do drive-bys of my house every 2 hours, 24/7. I installed additional cameras. I changed all my locks. I even got a personal security alarm, one of those buttons you can press that immediately alerts police and sends your GPS location. For the next 2 weeks, I barely slept. Every noise had me jumping, checking cameras, reaching for my phone. I was exhausted, anxious, constantly on edge. But I kept going, kept documenting everything, kept building my case. And then finally, something broke. Detective Harris called me with news. They'd arrested Malik. Found him trying to use fake documents to open a bank account in my name. He'd been caught red-handed. And when they'd searched his apartment, they'd found a whole operation. Fake IDs, blank credit cards, card readers, stacks of documents. Including documents with my name on them, documents that had my social security number, my date of birth, copies of my driver's license. Malik had been planning to completely steal my identity, open accounts, take out loans, destroy my credit, steal everything. And the evidence showed that Darnell and Evelyn had paid him to do it. $12,000 up front, with promises of more once he successfully accessed my accounts. Detective Harris said Malik had agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was willing to testify against Darnell and Evelyn, to tell everything. Arrest warrants were being issued for both of them. I sat in Detective Harris's office listening to all of this, and I felt empty. Not happy, not sad, just empty. Because this man I'd married, this man I'd loved, had tried to completely destroy me. Had conspired to steal my identity, ruin my finances, take everything I'd worked for. And his mother had helped him do it. The arrests happened 2 days later. Darnell was picked up at the house where he'd been staying, some friend of Evelyn's. Evelyn was arrested at her own house. Both were charged with conspiracy to commit identity theft, attempted fraud, and a bunch of other charges I can't even remember all the legal terms for. I didn't go to their arraignment. Didn't want to see them. But Mr. Thompson went, and he told me afterward how it had gone down. Darnell had looked defeated, beaten, hadn't said much of anything. But Evelyn? She'd caused a scene, screaming about how I'd set them up, how this was all my fault, how I'd ruined their lives. The judge had told her to be quiet, or he'd hold her in contempt. She'd shut up after that. Both of them were released on bail. Darnell's bail was posted by someone. Mr. Thompson didn't know who. Evelyn used her house as collateral, but the message was clear. They were going down. The evidence was overwhelming. And me? I finally felt like I could breathe again. But the story wasn't over yet, because the divorce still needed to be finalized, and the trial was coming up. And what happened in that courtroom? Well, that was going to be the final nail in their coffins. The weeks between Darnell and Evelyn's arrests and the divorce trial were some of the strangest of my life. On one hand, I felt safer than I had in months. The stalking had stopped. The threats had stopped. The constant fear that something bad was about to happen had finally lifted. But on the other hand, I had to come to terms with just how close I'd come to losing everything. If I hadn't frozen my credit when I did, if I hadn't set up those security cameras, if I hadn't been as careful as I was, Malik would have succeeded. Malik would have succeeded. My identity would have been stolen, my accounts drained, my credit destroyed, and Darnell and Evelyn would have gotten away with it. That thought kept me up at night sometimes. Mr. Thompson kept me updated on the criminal case against them. Malik had indeed cooperated fully. He'd given the prosecutors everything: text messages between him and Darnell, recordings of phone calls with Evelyn, receipts for the $12,000 they'd paid him. The evidence was damning, absolutely damning. Malik told investigators the whole plan. Darnell had approached him about 6 weeks after the barbecue incident, said he needed help getting access to his wife's money, that she was freezing him out unfairly. Malik had laid out the options. They could try to forge documents to access accounts directly, or they could steal my identity completely and open new accounts. Darnell had gone with option 2, said it would be cleaner, less traceable. Evelyn had been involved from the start. She'd been the one who'd gotten my documents for them. Remember when I said I'd noticed someone had been going through my things? That was probably her, or someone working for her. She'd managed to get photos of my social security card, my driver's license, utility bills with my address. They'd planned to open multiple credit cards in my name, max them all out, then disappear. Darnell was even looking into leaving the state, maybe heading to Florida or Texas, where they could start over. With my money, my credit, my identity. When Mr. Thompson told me all of this, I just sat in his office shaking my head. 6 years. I'd been married to this man for 6 years. And in all that time, I'd never really known him at all. The divorce trial was set for a Thursday in early June. By that point, the criminal case was moving forward in parallel, but the divorce would be settled first. I woke up that morning with butterflies in my stomach. This was it. The end of this chapter of my life. One way or another, after today, I'd be free. I dressed carefully. Nothing too flashy, but professional. A navy blue pantsuit, cream blouse, pearl earrings. I wanted to look like the successful businesswoman I was, not like a victim. Thomas and Monica drove me to the courthouse. David met us there, dressed in his lawyer's suit, ready to support his aunt. They all hugged me before we went in, told me I'd got this. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Just a few rows of seats, the judge's bench, tables for the lawyers. Darnell was already there with his attorney, sitting at one table. Mr. Thompson and I took the other table. When Darnell looked at me, I saw that he'd lost weight. A lot of weight. His face was gaunt, his eyes had dark circles under them. He looked 10 years older than he had just a few months ago. Good. Judge Reynolds came in, and we all rose. She took her seat, reviewed the case file, and then looked at both of us over her glasses. She started by noting that this case had some unusual circumstances. That there were criminal proceedings pending against the respondent. That's what they called Darnell in legal terms. And that those proceedings would be taken into account. Darnell's lawyer tried to argue that the criminal case shouldn't affect the divorce. Judge Reynolds shut him down immediately, told him that evidence of fraud and attempted identity theft was absolutely relevant to the question of asset distribution and support obligations. Then she asked Mr. Thompson to present our case. Mr. Thompson was methodical. He walked the judge through everything. The prenuptial agreement showing separate property, the evidence of the $168,000 Darnell had spent over 6 years, the hidden son, the attempts to steal my identity. He had it all organized in binders, color-coded with tabs. It was beautiful, honestly. Watching him work was like watching an artist. When he got to the part about Jaden, Judge Reynolds stopped him. She looked at Darnell and asked him directly if he'd hidden the existence of a child from me during our marriage. Darnell's voice was barely audible when he answered, "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Reynolds asked him why. What possible reason could he have for keeping something like that secret? Darnell stumbled over his words, said he was ashamed, that he didn't know how to tell me, that he was afraid I'd leave him. Judge Reynolds's expression didn't change, but her voice got cold when she said, "So instead of being honest with your wife, you chose to lie to her and use her money to support a child she knew nothing about?" Darnell didn't answer, just stared at the table. Then Mr. Thompson presented the evidence from the criminal investigation, the documents showing Darnell and Evelyn's conspiracy with Malik, the attempted loans, the fake credit card applications, all of it. Darnell's lawyer tried to object again, saying his client was innocent until proven guilty in criminal court. Judge Reynolds pointed out that this was civil court and the standard of evidence was different. The preponderance of evidence showed Darnell had attempted to defraud me. Finally, Mr. Thompson rested our case. Then it was Darnell's lawyer's turn, and honestly, there wasn't much he could say. He tried to paint Darnell as a victim of circumstance, a man who'd made mistakes, but who deserved compassion. He talked about how difficult it was to find employment, about systemic racism in the job market, about Darnell's good intentions. It was all nonsense, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. When it was time for final arguments, Mr. Thompson stood up and said something that stuck with me. He looked at the judge and said, Your Honor, this case is about a woman who worked for 41 years to build a life for herself, who retired with dignity and financial security, who believed, when she married the respondent, that she was entering into a partnership based on mutual respect and love. Instead, she found herself in a 6-year ordeal of lies, theft, and ultimately, criminal conspiracy. Mrs. Blake is not asking for revenge. She's asking for justice. She's asking for the dissolution of a fraudulent marriage and the return of her peace of mind. I had to blink back tears when he said that. Because that's exactly what I wanted. Peace of mind. Judge Reynolds took less than 10 minutes to make her decision. She came back into the courtroom, sat down, and read from her ruling. Divorce granted. No asset division. All property remained mine as specified in the prenuptial agreement. No alimony. Darnell had demonstrated bad faith throughout the marriage and was not entitled to support. And more than that, she ordered Darnell to reimburse me for the unauthorized use of my corporate credit cards. The amount, $46,000. To be paid in monthly installments of $410 for 12 years. Darnell's face went white when he heard that number. His lawyer tried to argue that his client couldn't afford those payments. Judge Reynolds told him that was his client's problem, that perhaps he should consider finding employment, something he should have done 6 years ago. And then she said something else. She noted that Darnell had a child support obligation for his son Jaden. She looked up the case file and saw that he'd been paying the minimum amount. She ordered that his child support be recalculated based on imputed income, meaning they were going to assume he could earn at least minimum wage full-time and set his support accordingly. The new amount, $630 a month. Darnell would be paying over $1,000 a month between child support and reimbursement for the next 12 years. When Judge Reynolds banged her gavel and said, "This case is closed," I felt like I could finally breathe. Really breathe. For the first time in 6 years. Thomas and Monica hugged me. David shook Mr. Thompson's hand and congratulated him on the win. We all walked out of that courtroom together. Darnell was in the hallway with his lawyer. They were talking in hushed voices, his lawyer shaking his head. When Darnell saw me, he took a step toward me. Thomas immediately stepped between us, told Darnell not to even think about it. But Darnell just looked at me over Thomas's shoulder. And he said, his voice broken, "I'm sorry, Lorraine. I'm so sorry for everything." I looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd fooled me for 6 years. This man who'd lied to me, stolen from me, conspired to ruin me. This man who'd just been completely destroyed in court. And you know what I felt? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I told him his apology didn't change anything. It didn't erase what he'd done. It didn't give me back the 6 years I'd wasted on him. So he could keep it. Then I walked away. Didn't look back. Didn't want to. Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining. It was a beautiful day, warm with a light breeze. Thomas suggested we all go get lunch to celebrate. Monica thought that was a great idea. David said he'd join us. We went to a nice restaurant downtown, the kind with white tablecloths and fancy food. I ordered champagne, the good stuff, and we all toasted. To freedom, to justice, to new beginnings. But as happy as I was, as relieved as I felt, I knew this wasn't completely over. The criminal trial for Darnell and Evelyn was still coming. And I'd have to testify. I'd have to face them again. Mr. Thompson had warned me about that. Said the prosecutor would call me as a witness, that I'd have to tell the whole story again in front of a jury. I'd told him I was ready. And I was. About 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I got a call from the prosecutor's office. A woman named Assistant District Attorney Sarah Chen. She wanted to meet with me to prepare for the trial. I went to her office on a Tuesday morning. She was young, maybe in her mid-30s, sharp as a tack. She walked me through what would happen at trial, what questions she'd ask me, what to expect from the defense attorneys. She told me the case against Darnell and Evelyn was strong. Malik's testimony, plus all the physical evidence, made it almost airtight. But she wanted to make sure I was prepared for what the defense might try to do. They'd probably try to paint me as vindictive, as someone making things up to hurt them. I told her to bring it on. I had the truth on my side, and I had evidence to back up every word I said. The criminal trial was set for late July, and in the weeks leading up to it, something happened that I never expected. I got a letter in the mail. From Evelyn. It wasn't a threatening letter this time. It was pathetic. She wrote about how she was facing serious prison time, how she'd lose her house, her life savings, everything, how she was sorry for what she'd done. She asked me to consider dropping the charges, said she'd pay me back somehow, over time, said she'd make it right. I read that letter 3 times, and then I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I called her. When she answered, her voice was tentative. Lorraine? I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I asked her if she'd really written that letter herself, or if her lawyer had told her to write it. There was silence on the other end. Then she admitted her lawyer had suggested it, thought it might help her case if she showed remorse. I told her I appreciated her honesty about that at least. Then I explained something to her real simple. I told her that what she and Darnell had done wasn't just wrong. It was criminal. That she'd conspired to steal my identity, ruin my credit, destroy my financial life. And I asked her what would have happened to me if they'd succeeded. Would I have been able to recover? Would I have been able to survive? She was quiet. I continued, told her I'd worked 41 years for what I had, 41 years, and she and her son had tried to take it all in a matter of weeks. So no, I wasn't dropping the charges. She was going to face the consequences of her actions. She started crying on the phone, real crying, not the fake dramatic stuff. She said she knew that she deserved it, that she was just scared. I told her she should be scared, and then I hung up. I didn't feel good about that call, didn't feel bad either, just felt done. The trial came. It lasted 3 days. I testified on the second day, spent 4 hours on the stand answering questions from Ada Chen and then from the defense attorneys. The defense tried exactly what Ada Chen had predicted. They tried to make me look vindictive, tried to suggest I was exaggerating the financial losses, tried to imply that Darnell and Evelyn were just desperate people who'd made a mistake. But I held my ground, answered every question calmly, factually, and every time they tried to trip me up, I brought it back to the evidence. The bank records, the credit card statements, the security footage, the text messages with Malik. When I stepped down from the witness stand, Ada Chen gave me a little nod. Like she was saying, "Good job." Malik testified after me. He laid out the whole conspiracy in detail. How Darnell had contacted him, how much they'd paid him, what they'd asked him to do. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, came back with guilty verdicts on all counts for both Darnell and Evelyn. Darnell got 3 years in prison. Evelyn got 2 years. When the judge read the sentences, Evelyn broke down crying. Darnell just sat there with his head in his hands. I didn't feel triumphant watching them get sentenced, didn't feel happy, just felt empty, tired, ready for all of this to be over. But you know what? It was over. Finally, truly over. And as I walked out of that courtroom for the last time, I realized something. I'd survived. I'd fought back against people who'd tried to destroy me, and I'd won. And now I could finally start living again. After Darnell and Evelyn were sentenced, you'd think everything would have gone back to normal pretty quick, that I'd just move on with my life, put all of it behind me. But it wasn't that simple. Nothing about that whole situation was simple. The first few weeks after the trial, I felt this weird mix of relief and emptiness. Relief because it was over, obviously, but emptiness because for 6 years, my life had been defined by that relationship. Even when it was bad, even when it was toxic, it was something. And now there was nothing. Just me and my big empty house and all this quiet. I started going to therapy. A colleague of Dr. Reynolds that she'd recommended, a woman named Dr. Patricia Morrison, who specialized in helping people recover from abusive relationships. And yes, I finally accepted that what I'd been in was abusive. Not physically abusive, but financially and emotionally abusive. Dr. Morrison helped me see that. Helped me understand that Darnell hadn't just stolen my money. He'd stolen my confidence, my trust, my belief in my own judgment. For 6 years he'd been gaslighting me, making me question myself, making me feel like I was being unreasonable when I questioned his spending or his lies. She also helped me work through the shame, because I was ashamed, y'all. Ashamed that I'd fallen for it. Ashamed that I, a successful businesswoman who'd built an empire from nothing, had been fooled so completely. Dr. Morrison told me something that really stuck with me. She said, "Lorraine, intelligent people don't fall for scams because they're stupid. They fall for scams because they're trusting. And there's nothing wrong with being a trusting person. The problem is the people who abuse that trust." Those words helped more than she probably realized. I also started reconnecting with friends I'd neglected during the marriage. Darnell had always found reasons why we couldn't go to this event or that gathering. He'd make us late on purpose, or pick fights right before we were supposed to leave, or just flat out refuse to go. Eventually, I'd stopped accepting invitations because it was easier than dealing with his attitude. But now I could go wherever I wanted, whenever I wanted. And it felt amazing. I joined a book club, started taking an art class, painting, something I'd always wanted to learn, began going to the gym regularly, took a weekend trip to Charleston just because I felt like it. And slowly, I started feeling like myself again, like Lorraine. Not Darnell's wife, not the woman who'd been scammed. Just me. About 2 months after the trial, I got some news that surprised me. Monica called one afternoon and asked if I'd be willing to meet with someone. She said it was important, but she didn't want to explain over the phone. I went to her house that evening. When I got there, Monica had a visitor. It was Shanice. I hadn't seen Shanice since right after the trial, when she'd sent me a message thanking me for everything I'd done. She'd been in the courtroom for parts of the trial, had heard the testimony about how Darnell had hidden Jaden from me. Shanice stood up when I came in, looking nervous. Little Jaden was with her, and oh my God, that boy had gotten big. He was 5 years old now, a beautiful little boy with Darnell's eyes, but thankfully, none of his personality yet. Shanice started talking real fast, like she'd rehearsed what she wanted to say. She told me she'd felt terrible all these years, that even though she hadn't known I existed when she'd accepted Darnell's help, she still felt like she'd been part of the problem, that her son had been used as a tool to steal from me. I held up my hand, stopping her, told her she'd done nothing wrong, that she'd been a victim just like me, that Jaden had nothing to do with any of this. She wiped her eyes and told me there was something else. She'd met someone. A good man, a mechanic named Andre, who owned his own shop. They'd been dating for about 6 months, and it was getting serious, and Andre treated Jaden like he was his own son. I told her that was wonderful news, asked her why she seemed nervous about telling me. She explained that she wanted to make sure I knew she wasn't forgetting what I'd done for her, that the money I'd given her 4 years ago had allowed her to get on her feet, get Jaden into a good daycare, eventually save up to start her own hair salon. And then she handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $3,700, the money I'd given her plus a little extra. I tried to give it back, told her she didn't owe me anything, but she insisted, said it was important to her to pay back her debts, that Andre had helped her save up the money and they both wanted me to have it. I looked at that check for a long time. And then I did something that surprised even me. I told Shanice to keep it, to use it for Jaden's college fund, or for her business, or for her wedding if she and Andre got married. That I didn't need it, and she did. She started crying again, thanked me over and over. We talked for another hour. She showed me pictures of her salon, a small but beautiful space in a strip mall. Told me about her plans to expand, maybe hire another stylist. When I left Monica's house that night, I felt good, like some kind of circle had been completed. Shanice had survived, had thrived even. And little Jaden was going to have a good life with a real father figure in Andre. At least something good had come out of all that mess. Around this time, I also started hearing about Darnell and Evelyn's situation. Not because I was keeping tabs on them, but because word gets around in a community. you know? Darnell was in a medium-security prison about 2 hours outside Atlanta. According to what I heard through the grapevine, he was working in the prison kitchen, making about 21 cents an hour. His child support payments were being taken directly from his prison wages, all 21 cents of it, which meant Shanice was getting about $40 a month. The rest of what he owed was just accumulating as arrears he'd have to pay when he got out. The $410 a month he owed me in reimbursement? Same thing. It was being deducted from his prison wages, which meant I was getting maybe $35 a month. Not exactly breaking the bank, but it was the principle of the thing. Evelyn was in a women's facility. She'd lost her house, couldn't keep up with the payments and the legal fees. Her church friends had mostly abandoned her after the truth came out. She was completely alone. And you know what? I didn't feel sorry for either of them. Maybe I should have. Maybe a better person would have. But I didn't. They'd made their choices. They'd tried to destroy me. And now they were facing the consequences. Meanwhile, my life kept getting better. I paid off my mortgage completely, didn't need it anymore, and the interest was just wasted money. I updated my will, making sure everything would go to Thomas's kids and to a few charities I cared about. I even started dating a little bit. Nothing serious, just coffee here and there with men I met through friends or at social events. And then, about 4 months after the trial, I did something I'd been thinking about for a while. I took a trip, a big trip, to Europe. I'd always wanted to see Paris, Rome, Barcelona, but my first husband had died before we could travel like that. And with Darnell, well, he'd never wanted to go anywhere that required him to actually do anything. So I booked a 25-day tour. France, Italy, Spain. Visited museums, ate incredible food, stayed in nice hotels, met interesting people from all over the world. And it was on that trip, in a small cafe in Rome, that I met Raymond. Raymond was 65 years old, a retired doctor from Savannah, Georgia. He'd lost his wife to breast cancer 3 years earlier and was traveling Europe alone, trying to find himself again, he said. We ended up sitting next to each other on a tour bus to the Colosseum, started talking, found out we had a lot in common, both widowed, both from Georgia, both trying to figure out what the next chapter of our lives looked like. We spent the rest of the tour together, not in a romantic way at first, just as friends, travel companions. We'd explore museums together, have long dinners talking about everything and nothing, laugh about the struggles of being older Americans trying to navigate foreign countries. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. I started looking forward to seeing him each morning. Started noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. Started feeling things I hadn't felt in years. On our last night in Barcelona, Raymond asked if he could take me to dinner. A real dinner, he said. Just the two of us. We went to this beautiful restaurant overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. He ordered wine, we shared tapas, talked for hours. And at the end of the night, he took my hand across the table and said, "Lorraine, I know we just met, and I know we're both at a stage in life where we should probably be cautious. But I really enjoy spending time with you, and I'd like to keep doing that when we get back to the States, if you'd be interested." I looked at this man. This kind, genuine, hard-working man who'd built a career healing people, who'd loved his wife deeply and mourned her properly, who treated me with respect and dignity and never once asked me about my money or my house or what I could do for him. And I told him yes. I'd like that very much. We exchanged numbers, made plans to meet up when we got back to Georgia. He lived in Savannah. I lived in Atlanta. But it was only a few hours' drive. We could make it work if we wanted to. And we did want to. When I got back to Atlanta, Raymond called me that same day, asked if I'd like to have dinner that weekend. I said yes. That first official date turned into a second, then a third. Then we were seeing each other every weekend, alternating between Savannah and Atlanta. Raymond was everything Darnell wasn't. He had his own money, a comfortable retirement from his medical practice. He had his own house, his own life, his own interests. He didn't need me for anything. He just enjoyed my company. When we'd go out to dinner, he'd insist on paying his half. When I'd offer to drive, he'd offer to pay for gas. Everything was equal, balanced, respectful, And he never, not once, made me feel like my age was a problem. He thought I was beautiful, told me so regularly, made me feel desired in a way I hadn't felt in years. My family loved him too. Thomas invited him to one of his monthly barbecues about 3 months into our relationship. Raymond fit right in, talking sports with my nephews, helping Thomas at the grill, charming Monica with stories from his medical practice. After that barbecue, Thomas pulled me aside and said, "Now that's what a real man looks like, sis. That's the kind of man you deserve." He was right. About 6 months into dating Raymond, he asked me something that surprised me. He asked if I'd ever consider moving in together. I wasn't sure at first. The idea of living with another man after what I'd been through with Darnell scared me. But Raymond was patient. He said there was no rush, that we could take as much time as I needed to think about it. I thought about it for a few weeks, talked it through with Dr. Morrison in therapy, talked about it with Monica and Thomas, and eventually I realized that I was holding back because of fear that Raymond might turn out like Darnell. But Raymond had proven himself time and time again. He was nothing like Darnell, so I said yes. We decided to buy a new house together. Something that was ours, not mine or his, but ours. We found a beautiful place in a suburb halfway between Atlanta and Savannah, with a big yard, a screened-in porch, and enough room for both of our stuff. Moving in together was an adjustment, I won't lie. After living alone for so long, having someone else in my space took some getting used to. But Raymond was respectful of my routines, my boundaries, my need for independence. And slowly, that house became a home. Our home. We'd have friends over for dinner. We'd work in the garden together on weekends. We'd curl up on the couch in the evenings and watch movies. It was peaceful, comfortable, real. For the first time in years, I felt happy. Truly, genuinely happy. About a year after Darnell was sentenced, I got a letter from him. It had been forwarded through Mr. Thompson's office. Darnell didn't have my address and wasn't allowed to contact me directly anyway. The letter was short. He apologized again for everything he'd done. Said prison had given him time to think, to really understand how badly he'd messed up his life. He said he didn't expect me to forgive him, that he didn't deserve forgiveness. He just wanted me to know he was sorry. I read that letter once, then I threw it away. I didn't need his apology, didn't need his acknowledgement of guilt. I'd moved on, built a new life, found happiness again. Darnell was my past, Raymond was my future. And that future? It was looking pretty damn good. Life with Raymond was good, really good. Better than I'd ever hoped it could be after everything I'd been through with Darnell. We'd been living together for about 4 months when something happened that reminded me just how lucky I was to have escaped when I did. I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Usually I don't answer those, but for some reason, that day I did. The voice on the other end was young, female, nervous. She said, "Is this Lorraine Blake? Were you married to Darnell Blake?" My whole body tensed up. I hadn't heard that name in months, had been doing my best not to think about him at all. I asked who was calling. She told me her name was Brianna, and that she really needed to talk to me about Darnell, that it was important. I sat down on my couch, already knowing this wasn't going to be good. I asked her what this was about, and then she told me a story that made my blood boil all over again. Brianna was 24 years old. She'd met Darnell about 2 months after he got out of prison on early release for good behavior. He'd served just over 2 years of his 3-year sentence and was out on parole. They'd met at a coffee shop where she worked. He'd come in regularly, always friendly, always charming. Eventually asked her out. She'd said yes. Now I want to be clear about something. Brianna didn't know about me. Didn't know about the trial, the fraud, any of it. Darnell had told her he'd made some mistakes when he was younger, had done time for something he regretted, but was turning his life around now. She'd believed him, just like I had. They'd been dating for about 3 months when things started to feel off. Darnell never seemed to have money, even though he claimed he was working as a warehouse manager. He'd borrow $20 here, $50 there, always with promises to pay her back. Then one day, Brianna noticed a charge on her credit card she didn't recognize. $785 at an electronics store. When she asked Darnell about it, because he'd been the only other person who had access to her card, he admitted he'd used it to buy a new tablet. Said he needed it for work, that he'd pay her back on his next paycheck. Except the next paycheck never came. And when she pushed him on it, he got defensive. Started saying she didn't trust him, that he was trying his best, that she should be more understanding. She'd heard those excuses before from an ex-boyfriend, and something about it felt wrong. So she did what any smart woman in 2025 would do. She Googled him. And that's when she found everything. The news articles about the trial, the court records showing the fraud charges, everything. She'd confronted him that same day. He'd tried to explain, tried to minimize it, said the whole thing had been blown out of proportion, that I'd been vindictive and made things worse than they were. She hadn't believed him, told him to get out of her apartment and never contact her again. But now, sitting there on the phone with me, her voice was shaking when she said, "Miss Lorraine, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I needed to talk to someone who'd been through this with him, because I needed to know if I was crazy for feeling like he was lying about everything." I took a deep breath. Poor girl. She was going through exactly what I'd gone through, just on a smaller scale. I told her she wasn't crazy, that everything she was feeling was valid. And then I told her something I wished someone had told me years ago. "Brianna, listen to me carefully. Darnell Blake is not going to change. I don't care what he told you. I don't care how sorry he seemed. I don't care if he cried or promised or swore on his mother's grave. He is 45 years old, and he has never, not once in his entire life, held down a real job or supported himself. He's a con artist. And the only thing he's good at is finding women who have something he wants and manipulating them until he gets it." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard her crying softly. I felt bad for her. But I also felt grateful that she'd figured it out in 3 months instead of 6 years. I asked her if she wanted advice. She said yes, so I told her, block his number, block him on all social media. If he shows up at your work or your apartment, call the police. He's on parole and any harassment would be a violation. Document everything he took from you. And most importantly, don't feel stupid for believing him. He's had 45 years to perfect his act. You're not the first woman he's fooled, and unfortunately, you probably won't be the last." She thanked me, said she felt better just knowing she wasn't alone, that someone understood. We talked for a few more minutes and then hung up. After that call, I sat on my couch for a long time just thinking. Darnell was out of prison, and already he was doing the exact same thing he'd always done, finding vulnerable women and using them. I told Raymond about the call that night. He got this look on his face, anger mixed with disgust. He asked if Darnell knew where we lived. I told him no. I'd made sure to keep my address private, had everything forwarded through Mr. Thompson's office. As far as I knew, Darnell had no idea where I was. Raymond said that was good. But he also said we should stay vigilant, that people like Darnell, when they get desperate, they do desperate things. He was right to be cautious. But I wasn't too worried. I'd beaten Darnell once. If he tried anything again, I'd beat him again. A few weeks after that phone call, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in a while. I was at Publix doing my grocery shopping when I saw her in the produce section. Cheryl, Evelyn's friend. The one who'd slashed my tires all those months ago. She saw me at the same time I saw her. Her face went pale, and she actually took a step back like she was afraid of me. I wasn't going to say anything. Was just going to keep shopping and ignore her. But she came up to me, looking nervous and ashamed. She said my name real quiet, Lorraine. I stopped and looked at her, waited for her to say what she needed to say. She told me she wanted to apologize, that she'd done a stupid, terrible thing because Evelyn had convinced her I was the bad guy, that she'd believed Evelyn's lies and acted on them, that she'd served time for vandalizing my car and lost her job because of it, and that it was only after everything came out in court that she realized the truth. I listened to all of this without saying anything. When she finished, I asked her a simple question. Did she really think, even for a second, that slashing someone's tires was okay? That it was justified no matter what story she'd been told? She looked down at her feet and said no, that she should have known better. I told her I appreciated the apology, that it took courage to face someone you'd wronged. But I also told her that actions have consequences. She'd made her choice, and now she had to live with the results. She nodded, said she understood. Then she asked me something that surprised me. She asked if I knew what had happened to Evelyn. I said I'd heard she was in prison, but that was all I knew. Cheryl told me that Evelyn had died. About 2 months earlier. Heart attack. She'd had health problems for years, high blood pressure, diabetes, and hadn't been taking care of herself in prison. One morning, she'd just collapsed in the cafeteria, dead before the paramedics even arrived. I stood there in the produce section of Publix, holding a bag of apples, processing this information. Evelyn was dead. I asked Cheryl if Darnell knew. She said yes, that he'd been given emergency leave from prison to attend a small funeral service. Only about 5 people had shown up: Cheryl, a couple of old friends from Evelyn's church, and Darnell. Cheryl described how Darnell had looked completely broken at the funeral, crying, couldn't even stand up on his own, had to be supported by the prison guards who'd escorted him. I listened to all of this and felt nothing. Maybe I should have felt sorry for him, losing his mother. But I couldn't forget that his mother had helped him try to destroy me, that she'd been just as complicit in the fraud as he was. I thanked Cheryl for telling me. She asked if I was doing okay, if I'd moved on with my life. I told her I was doing great, actually, better than I'd been in years, that I'd met someone wonderful and was building a new life. She smiled, said she was glad, said I deserved happiness after everything I'd been through. We parted ways after that. I finished my shopping and went home. When I told Raymond about running into Cheryl and hearing about Evelyn's death, he asked how I felt about it. I thought about that for a minute. Then I told him the truth. I felt nothing. Evelyn had made her choices. She'd conspired to commit crimes against me. And now she was gone. That was it. I didn't feel satisfaction, didn't feel sadness. Just nothing. Raymond hugged me and said that was probably the healthiest response I could have. Life kept moving forward. I kept building my new normal with Raymond. We traveled more, took a cruise to Alaska, spent a week in Hawaii. We talked about the future, about maybe getting married officially, about what our retirement years would look like. And Shanice? She was thriving. She'd married Andre in a small ceremony about 6 months after we reconnected. I'd been invited, and I'd gone, brought Raymond with me. It was a beautiful wedding, simple but full of love. Little Jaden had been the ring bearer, all dressed up in a tiny suit, taking his job so seriously it was adorable. Shanice's salon was doing well, too. She'd hired 2 more stylists and was thinking about opening a second location. Andre's mechanic shop was successful. They'd bought a small house in a nice neighborhood. Jaden was enrolled in a good school. They'd built a real life, a good life. And you know what? Seeing them happy, seeing them thriving, that gave me more satisfaction than anything else from this whole situation. Because at the end of the day, something good had come from all that pain. Shanice had her feet under her. Jaden had a real family, and I'd helped make that happen. As for Darnell, well, after Evelyn died, apparently he'd become even more desperate. According to the few updates I got through the grapevine, he'd tried to reconnect with old friends from before prison. Most of them wanted nothing to do with him. The ones who did let him crash on their couches quickly kicked him out when money or belongings started going missing. He'd tried to get jobs, but couldn't hold them. His parole officer had to keep warning him about missing check-ins. He was on a fast track back to prison, and everyone could see it except him. One time, about 1.5 years after I first heard from Brianna, I got another call. This time from Darnell's parole officer, a man named Officer Jenkins. He wanted to let me know that Darnell had violated his parole multiple times and was going back to prison to serve out the rest of his original sentence plus additional time for the violations. Officer Jenkins said he was calling me because, as the victim in Darnell's original case, I had a right to know. He also wanted to assure me that Darnell would be in prison for at least another 3 years. I thanked him for letting me know. And when I hung up, I felt that same nothing again. No satisfaction, no sadness, just acknowledgement that this was happening and it had nothing to do with me anymore. Raymond and I were sitting on our screened porch when I got that call. After I told him what Officer Jenkins had said, Raymond took my hand and said, "You know what's amazing about you, Lorraine? You survived something that would have destroyed a lot of people. You fought back, you won, and then you moved on. You didn't let bitterness consume you. You built a new life. That takes real strength." Those words meant more to me than he probably realized, because he was right. I had survived, I had moved on, and I was happy. Genuinely, truly happy. And that, more than any court victory, more than any revenge, more than anything else, that was my real triumph. I'd taken my life back. I'd found love again. I'd found peace. And nothing Darnell had done, nothing he could ever do, would take that away from me. 2 years after that Sunday barbecue where everything fell apart, my life looked completely different. And I mean completely. I was living in a beautiful house with a man who actually loved me. Not my money, not my house, not what I could do for him. Just me. Raymond loved me for who I was. And that was something I'd never really had before, if I'm being honest. My first husband, God rest his soul, had been a good man. But our relationship had been more about partnership and companionship than passionate love. We'd built a life together, raised no children. We couldn't have any. Built my business together. It was good, but it was practical. With Darnell, well, there'd never been love at all. Just lies and manipulation. But with Raymond, this was something different. This was real. We'd wake up in the morning and have coffee together on the porch, talking about our plans for the day. He'd tell me about the book he was reading or share something interesting he'd learned. I'd tell him about the art class I was taking or the new recipe I wanted to try. Simple things, normal things. Things I'd never really had before. And the best part? Everything was equal. When we'd go out to dinner, we'd split the bill or take turns paying. When we'd buy groceries, we'd each contribute. When we'd plan a trip, we'd both put in money. Raymond had made it clear from the very beginning that he didn't want or need my money. He had his own retirement from his medical practice, his own savings, his own house that he'd sold when we'd bought our place together. One time, early in our relationship, I'd tried to pay for an expensive dinner we'd had. Raymond had actually gotten a little upset. Not angry upset, but serious. He'd told me, "Lorraine, I'm not with you because you can pay for things. I'm with you because I enjoy your company. Please don't treat me like I can't afford to take care of myself." That conversation had actually brought tears to my eyes, because for 6 years with Darnell, paying for everything had been expected, required, and here was this man telling me he didn't want that. It was such a stark difference, it almost didn't feel real at first. About 18 months into living together, Raymond did something that completely surprised me. We'd been having dinner at home one evening. I'd made pot roast with potatoes and carrots, his favorite, when he got up from the table and went to the bedroom. I thought maybe he wasn't feeling well, but when he came back, he was holding a small box. My heart started racing. I knew what that box was, knew what it meant. Raymond sat back down at the table and took my hand. His voice was steady, but I could hear the emotion in it when he said, "Lorraine, I know we've both been married before. I know we've both been through hard things, and I know we're at an age where people might think this is silly, but I don't care what people think. I love you. I want to spend whatever time we have left in this life together. Officially. Will you marry me?" I looked at this man. This kind, gentle, genuine man who'd come into my life when I least expected it. Who'd shown me what real partnership looked like, who'd never asked me for anything except my company. And I said yes. Of course I said yes. We got married 3 months later. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends. We had it in the garden of our house, under an arch covered in white roses. Monica helped me plan everything. Thomas walked me down the makeshift aisle we'd created in the grass. Shanice and Andre came with little Jaden, who was 6 years old by then. Jaden was fascinated by the whole thing, kept asking questions about why people were crying if they were happy. Raymond's son and daughter came from Savannah with their families. They'd been welcoming to me from the start, treating me like family even before the wedding. It was perfect. Simple, beautiful, perfect. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to the marriage, there was this moment where my whole body tensed up. Some part of me, I think, was still afraid that Darnell would somehow show up and ruin this too. But of course he didn't. He was in prison, and even if he wasn't, he'd been served with a permanent restraining order that lasted well beyond his sentence. The ceremony continued. Raymond and I exchanged rings, simple gold bands that we'd picked out together. We said our vows, traditional ones from the book, nothing fancy. And when the officiant said, "You may kiss your bride," Raymond kissed me, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pure, uncomplicated joy. At the reception, which was just a casual gathering in our backyard with catered food and a playlist of our favorite songs, Thomas stood up to make a toast. He raised his glass and looked at me with tears in his eyes. Said, "Lorraine, you're my baby sister. I've watched you go through some really hard times, watched you get knocked down in ways that would have broken a lot of people. But you got back up, you fought, you survived, and now, looking at you with Raymond, I see something I haven't seen in you in a long time. I see happiness, real happiness, and you deserve every bit of it." Everyone clinked their glasses, and I had to wipe my eyes because I was full-on crying. Monica gave a toast too. Talked about how proud she was of me, how strong I'd been, how glad she was that I'd found someone who treated me right. Even David, my nephew the lawyer, stood up and said a few words. Joked about how he'd vetted Raymond's background, run a full credit check, criminal history, employment verification, the works, and Raymond had passed with flying colors. Everyone laughed, but I knew David was only half joking. He'd actually done some checking, just to make sure. Not because he didn't trust my judgment, but because he loved me and wanted to protect me. Raymond had thought it was funny when David told him about it. Said he appreciated having a family that looked out for each other. Our honeymoon was a dream. We went back to Europe, a 2-week trip through the countryside of France and Italy. We stayed in small bed and breakfasts, visited vineyards, walked through medieval villages, ate the most amazing food. And every morning, I'd wake up next to Raymond and think, this is what it's supposed to feel like. This is what a real marriage is. When we got back to Georgia, we settled into our life together. I'd officially fully retired by this point, sold off the last remnants of my cosmetics company to a larger corporation. The money from that sale set me up even more comfortably for the rest of my life. Raymond was fully retired too. We had time. Time to travel, time to pursue hobbies, time to just enjoy life. I kept up with my art classes and had actually gotten pretty good at watercolor painting. Raymond had taken up woodworking and was building beautiful furniture in the workshop we'd set up in our garage. We'd have Thomas and Monica over for dinner once a month. We'd visit Raymond's kids in Savannah every few weeks. We'd go to movies, take long walks, work in our garden. It was peaceful, calm, normal, and I'd never been more grateful for normal in my entire life. One afternoon, about 6 months after the wedding, I was in our garden planting some tomatoes when I heard my phone ring inside the house. Raymond answered it. We'd long since gotten to the point where we'd answer each other's phones if the other person was busy. A few minutes later, he came out to the garden with a strange look on his face. He told me the call had been from the Georgia Department of Corrections. Darnell had listed me as someone to notify in case of emergency. My stomach dropped. I asked what had happened. Raymond explained that Darnell had been in a fight with another inmate. Nothing life-threatening, but he'd been hurt pretty badly. Broken ribs, broken nose, some other injuries. He was in the prison hospital. The corrections officer who'd called had said that Darnell had been asking for them to contact me, that he wanted me to know he was hurt. I stood there in my garden, dirt on my hands, tomato plants at my feet, and felt absolutely nothing. No concern, no sympathy, no guilt, nothing. I told Raymond to tell them, if they called back, that I had no interest in receiving updates about Darnell's condition. that I'd moved on with my life, and he was no longer my concern. Raymond said he'd already told them that, but he wanted to make sure I was okay with it. I told him I was more than okay with it, that Darnell had made his choices and now he was living with them, just like I was living with mine. Raymond hugged me, getting dirt all over his shirt from my hands, and told me he loved me. I told him I loved him too, and meant it with every fiber of my being. That night, lying in bed next to Raymond, I thought about the journey I'd been on. From that Sunday barbecue, where my world fell apart through the divorce, the trials, the fear and anxiety and anger, through the healing, the therapy, the slow rebuilding of my life. And now here I was, married to a wonderful man, living in a beautiful home, financially secure, happy. I thought about Darnell, alone in a prison hospital, probably thinking about all the choices he'd made that led him there. Part of me, a very small part, felt something like pity, because he'd had opportunities. He could have gotten a job, could have been a decent partner, could have been a real father to Jaden. But he'd chosen the easy way every time, the dishonest way. And that path had led him to exactly where he was. Meanwhile, I'd chosen the hard way. I'd fought back, stood up for myself, done the difficult work of healing and moving forward. And my path had led me here, to peace, to love, to happiness. As I drifted off to sleep that night, Raymond's arm around me, I felt grateful. Grateful for my strength, grateful for my family, grateful for Raymond, grateful for this life I'd built from the ashes of that terrible marriage. I'd survived. More than that, I'd thrived. And that, I thought, was the best revenge of all. 3.5 years after that Sunday barbecue, 3.5 years since my life imploded and then rebuilt itself into something better than I ever could have imagined. I'm 64 years old now. Raymond is 68. And we're living the kind of life I used to dream about, but never thought I'd actually have. Our days are full, but not rushed. We wake up when we want to, not when an alarm tells us to. We travel when the mood strikes us. Just last month, we spent 2 weeks in Costa Rica. We spend time with family, pursue our hobbies, enjoy each other's company. It's the life I worked 41 years to earn, and I'm finally able to enjoy it. The monthly payments from Darnell keep coming. $410 every month like clockwork, deducted automatically from whatever little prison wages he earns. I don't need that money, haven't needed it since the day he left my life. So I do what I said I'd do. Every single dollar he sends me, I donate it to a non-profit organization that helps women who are victims of financial abuse. Women who are going through what I went through. Women who need support and resources to escape toxic situations. In 3 years, I've donated almost $15,000 to that organization. And you know what? That feels better than keeping the money ever would have. Because now, Darnell's debt to me is actually helping people. It's making a difference. Jaden is 8 years old now. A beautiful, smart, happy little boy being raised by Shanice and Andre. Shanice's salon expanded like she'd dreamed. She now has 4 stylists working for her and just opened a second location. Andre's mechanic shop is doing well too. They bought a bigger house in a really nice school district. They invited Raymond and me to Jaden's 8th birthday party a few months ago. We went, brought a big present. Legos. The kid is obsessed with Legos. Watching Jaden run around with his friends, watching Andre throw him up in the air while he squealed with laughter, watching Shanice's face light up every time she looked at her family. That filled my heart in a way I can't even describe. That little boy has no idea about the complicated history that brought us all together. To him, I'm just Miss Lorraine, his mom's friend who brings good presents. And that's perfect. Sometimes Shanice and I talk about it, though. About everything that happened. She'll thank me again for helping her when she needed it most, and I'll tell her again that she doesn't need to thank me, that seeing her and Jaden thriving is thanks enough. One time, she asked me if I'd ever forgiven Darnell. I thought about that question for a long time before answering. Finally, I told her the truth. I don't think about him enough to forgive him or not forgive him. He's just not part of my life anymore. Not part of my thoughts. He's irrelevant to me. She nodded like she understood. Then she told me something that surprised me. She said Darnell had tried to contact her a few times from prison. Sent letters asking about Jaden, asking if he could have visitation rights when he got out. She'd responded through her lawyer. The answer was no. Darnell had given up any right to be a father when he'd abandoned her during the pregnancy, and then used his son as a tool to steal from me. Andre was Jaden's father in every way that mattered. I told her I thought that was the right decision, that Jaden deserved stability and love, not confusion and disappointment. About 6 months ago, something happened that I didn't expect. I got a letter forwarded through Mr. Thompson's office. But this one wasn't from Darnell. It was from his parole board. They were considering early release for him, again, and as a victim in his case, I had the right to submit a statement either supporting or opposing it. I sat with that letter for a few days. Part of me wanted to write a scathing opposition, to make sure he stayed locked up as long as possible. But another part of me just wanted to be done with all of it. I talked it through with Raymond, asked him what he thought I should do. He told me it was entirely my decision, but that if it was him, he'd probably just let it go. Not because Darnell deserved leniency, but because staying involved in his life, even to oppose him, was still letting him take up space in my head. He had a point. In the end, I didn't submit a statement at all. Didn't support, didn't oppose, just nothing. And you know what? That felt right. Because Darnell getting out of prison early or not getting out early had nothing to do with me anymore. It wasn't my problem. He could serve his full sentence or get out tomorrow, and either way, my life wouldn't change. I'd moved on, completely, totally moved on. A few weeks after that, Thomas called and asked if Raymond and I wanted to come to his monthly barbecue. Said it was going to be a special one. His youngest son was announcing his engagement. Of course, we said yes. When we pulled up to Thomas's house that Saturday afternoon, it was a Saturday this time, not a Sunday, I had this moment of déjà vu. Because the last time I'd been at one of these barbecues, my whole life had fallen apart. Raymond must have sensed what I was feeling because he squeezed my hand and said, "That was then. This is now. You're here with me and everything's good." He was right. We walked into that backyard and it was full of family. Thomas at the grill, Monica setting up food, my nephews and their families, kids running around. It looked almost exactly like it had 3.5 years ago. But everything was different, because I was different. Thomas saw me and Raymond and came over with a huge grin. Hugged us both, thanked us for coming. Led us over to where his son Mark was standing with his fiancée, a lovely woman named Jennifer. We spent the afternoon celebrating with them. Eating good food, laughing, talking about wedding plans, just enjoying being together as a family. At one point, I found myself standing in almost the exact spot where I'd stood when Darnell had announced he'd given my car to his mother. Where I'd pulled out my phone and in 30 seconds, changed everything. Monica came up beside me. She knew what I was thinking about without me having to say anything. She put her arm around my shoulders and said, "Look at you now, sis. Look how far you've come." I looked around that backyard, at my family who'd supported me through everything, at Raymond, who was talking with Thomas about golf and laughing at something my brother had said, at the life I'd built from the ruins of that marriage. And I smiled, because she was right. I had come so far. Later that evening, after we'd gotten home, Raymond and I were sitting on our porch, watching the sunset. It was one of those perfect Georgia evenings, warm but not hot, with a light breeze and the sound of birds settling in for the night. Raymond turned to me and said, "You know what I love about you, Lorraine. You're the strongest person I've ever met, and you don't even realize it." I laughed and told him I didn't feel that strong, that I'd made so many mistakes, been so foolish. He shook his head and said, "No, you trusted someone. That's not foolish, that's human. What makes you strong is that when you found out who he really was, you didn't just roll over and take it. You fought back, you protected yourself, you rebuilt your life. That's strength." Those words meant everything to me, because for so long I'd felt weak, felt stupid, felt ashamed that I'd let myself be used like that. But Raymond was right. The strength wasn't in never falling. The strength was in getting back up. We sat there until the stars came out, holding hands, not needing to say anything else. So that's my story. That's how I went from being a successful businesswoman who fell for a con man to being a woman who fought back and reclaimed her life. Do I regret marrying Darnell? Sometimes. I wish I'd had those 6 years to do something else with. But I also learned from it. Learned to be more cautious, to pay attention to red flags, to value myself more. Do I forgive him? I don't think forgiveness really applies here. He's not someone I think about enough to forgive. He's just gone from my life. Am I happy? Yes. Genuinely, truly happy in a way I've never been before. Would I do anything differently if I could go back? Maybe I'd listen to Thomas when he first warned me about Darnell. Maybe I'd leave sooner, but I can't change the past. I can only learn from it and move forward. And that's exactly what I've done. Today I wake up every morning grateful. Grateful for Raymond, for my family, for my health, for the financial security I worked so hard to earn and fought so hard to protect. Grateful for the peace I've found. Darnell is still in prison. Will be for at least another year, maybe more if his behavior doesn't improve. Evelyn is gone. The money he stole from me is slowly being paid back, dollar by dollar, and going to help other women in need. And me? I'm living my best life. Traveling, creating art, spending time with people I love, enjoying my retirement with a man who actually deserves me. That's the real ending to this story. Not revenge, not bitterness, not anger, just peace, just happiness, just a life well lived. And if you're out there listening to this, going through something similar, if you're being used, manipulated, disrespected, financially abused, I want you to know something. You're stronger than you think. You can get out. You can fight back. You can rebuild. It won't be easy. There will be hard days. There will be moments when you question yourself, when you feel weak, when you want to give up. But don't. Keep fighting. Keep moving forward, because on the other side of that fight is freedom, is peace, is the life you deserve. I did it, and so can you. So what did you think of my story? Do you think I did the right thing, standing up to Darnell the way I did? Or do you think I should have handled it differently? Write in the comments and let me know what city you're listening from, and if this story resonated with you, if it helped you in any way, please leave a like on the video. It helps the algorithm show this to other people who might need to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, please do. We share stories like this all the time, stories of resilience, of fighting back, of overcoming. There's another story queued up on your screen right now that I think you'll love. Go ahead and click on it when you're ready. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here with me on this journey. And remember, you are strong, you are worthy, you deserve respect and love and happiness. Until next time, take care of yourselves.